Just check the live stream here. Excellent. PC recording is underway.
Recording to cloud is on the way.
Good morning and welcome to today's remote New York City Council hearing of the Committee on General Welfare. At this time, would all panelists please turn on their video? To minimize disruption, please silence your electronic devices. And if you wish to submit testimony, you may do so at the following email address: testimony@council.nyc.gov. Once again, that is testimony@council.nyc.gov. Please note, written testimony may be submitted electronically for up to 72 hours after the hearing. Thank you for your cooperation. We are ready to begin. Mr. Chair, whenever you're ready. Mr. Chair, we don't hear you. You might be muted.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I have to gavel.
Here you go.
Okay. Thank you very, very much, Sergeant. I'm gaveling in right now. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's committee hearing on the Committee on General Welfare. This is my last hearing as chair, I believe, and I want to just thank everybody who has made this tenure, I think, as positive as possible. And I greatly appreciate everybody's cooperation with me and patience with me over the years. And hopefully we've made, in at least ways, in small ways, people's lives better in New York City. And so I just want to thank everybody. It's been obviously the honor of a lifetime to have been able to chair this committee. So I'm proud of all we've accomplished in the last 8 years and all of our partnerships with my colleagues in the administration, and of course the advocates and providers and people with lived experience who have shared their stories and insights with us. Our work simply could not be accomplished without their knowledge of how laws and policies impact them every day. And I cannot stress how appreciative I am of so many individuals taking the time out of their day in the middle of navigating bureaucracies or simply trying to keep their head afloat to come and educate my colleagues and me to ensure that our work is as impactful as possible. It's always been my priority to honor the lived experiences of those close to the issues in our hearings and in legislation that we pass. And while major strides have been made, it is clear that there is much more work to be done to ensure that every New Yorker has safe, adequate, stable housing with reliable access to comprehensive services. It's my hope that our hearing today can be an honest conversation about the state of street homelessness in New York City. And as this council session and mayoral administration come to a close, that we can help set up those who come after us for success by being clear about what has worked and what we need to do better. The topic of today's hearing will be the single adult homelessness in New York City, with a focus on the treatment of and services provided to those who are unsheltered, as well as the long lengths of stay in shelter and inadequate ability to move people out and into stable permanent housing. Though we knew it prior, the pandemic demonstrated just how important it is for safety, stability, and overall health and wellness to have a room of one's own. But of course, hotel rooms during a crisis are not the whole picture. And we still need to prioritize moving people out of shelter and into homes of their own. I'm very proud of what we were able to, I'm very proud that we were able to increase the CityFest voucher amount this year and streamline access to these vouchers for vulnerable populations for whom they were unavailable. But the next administration needs to ensure that people can actually use them and be aggressive in its approach to moving people out and finding them quality apartments with the services and support that they deserve. I want to thank all the advocates and members of the public who are joining us today. I want to thank the representatives from the administration for joining us, and I look forward to hearing from you on these critical issues. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues who are here today. I see Council Member Dharma Diaz is with us. I expect to be joined by additional colleagues throughout the course of the hearing. But right now, it's just me and Dharma. But I want to also thank my staff, Jonathan Boucher, my chief of staff, Elizabeth Adams and Nicole Hunt, my co-legislative directors, Vivek Srikumar, who is legislative staff as well, and committee staff, Aminta Kilawan, senior counsel, Crystal Pond, senior policy analyst, Natalie Omari, policy analyst, and Julia Hermes, financial analyst. And I do want to take this opportunity publicly to thank all of the committee staff, both current committee staff and past committee staff, who have put in an incredible amount of time and effort in preparing for this committee's hearings and legislation, doing the policy research, writing comprehensive committee reports that will be resources for future councils. These are all of the committee reports are available online, and I continue to see them as a great resource. I go back to committee reports, past committee reports all the time, and the work that they've done has been extraordinary. And so I just want to thank Aminta, Crystal, Natalie, and Julia today, but also all of the committee staff over the years, current and past, who have just done amazing work. And so I want to thank them publicly. Thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Aminta Kilawan, our committee counsel, to call on the first panel.
Thank you, Chair Levin. Good morning, everyone. My name is Aminta Kilawan, Senior Counsel to the Committee on General Welfare at the New York City Council. I'm going to be moderating today's hearing and calling panelists to testify. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that you'll be on mute until I call on you to testify. After you're called on, you're going to be unmuted by a member of our staff. Please note that there will be a delay of a few seconds until you are unmuted and we can hear you. For public testimony, I will call individuals up in panels. Please listen for your name. I will periodically announce the next few panelists. Once I call your name, a member of our staff will unmute you. The sergeant at arms will set a clock and give you the go-ahead to begin your testimony. All public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes. After I call your name, please wait for the sergeant at arms to announce that you may begin before starting your testimony. For today's hearing, we're going to have a first panel that will include public testimony from directly impacted individuals. Again, I'd like to remind everyone that I'll call you up in panels. Once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you and you may begin your testimony once the sergeant at arms sets the clock and gives you the cue. Again, all testimony will be limited to 3 minutes, and please remember that there is a few seconds delay when you are unmuted before we can hear you. Please wait for the sergeant at arms to announce that you may begin. The first panel of public testimony, in order of speaking, will be Starlight Harris, followed by Shams DeBaron, followed by Sarah Wilson, followed by Althea Matthews, and finally, followed by Danique Martinez. We are now going to begin with testimony from Starlight Harris.
Starting time.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I don't know where to begin other than I appreciate your time in letting me speak about this situation. I myself am currently homeless and I've been transferred six different shelters since I've been in the system. I've come across all types of problems with staff members. The place that I'm located now hasn't been properly set up to have people coming in, but people are steady coming in. DHS was here, I think last week, they did an inspection. They have one floor that they're still renovating in the building. The area that it's in is not safe, and I'm disabled. And I became homeless in January. Well, no, I became homeless in 2016 because I left my spouse because of domestic violence. And I've been kind of couch surfing for the last few years. And because of my illness, I finally just said, I can't keep running. I can't keep doing this anymore. And I went into a shelter, and I've been treated horribly, just very horribly. And I've seen the impact that not having a place to stay can do to people, especially single people. I see them in train stations lying on the floor, and sometimes I just want to get them up and feed them and bring them, but I know that's not possible. And I understand that everybody that's homeless, and I want you all to understand that everybody that is homeless doesn't have a mental problem or a drug problem. And I believe that DHS sometimes treats everyone as one size fits all, like it's a cookie cutter. If you're homeless because you're on drugs or you have mental problems. People don't consider that, you may have been burnt out of your home. You may have been run away from your home because of domestic violence, like myself. Or you may just be physically ill where you're unable to work and maintain a home or a roof over your head. And the fact that I've been in congregate shelters, which are absolutely deplorable. And the way they treat people is like animals. They go through your things, they treat it like garbage.
Time.
And the way they talk to you is like you have no rights. Like you feel as though you're in a prison. And that's how they treat you. They give you food that is basically unedible. And when people are yelling, screaming, sometimes I listen and I feel really bad because I understand when people don't have a voice, they don't know what to say. They can't write and express themselves. They can't speak to express themselves without yelling because sometimes they're not getting what they need. The place that I'm in now, once again, is very unsafe. It takes me 2 hours to get to my medical team in Brooklyn. I'm currently at a place in Jamaica. Place is very unsafe. I'm directly across the street from garbage. So I feel like a sanitation department. So I feel is what they're saying is like you're garbage because that's where we're putting you, across the street from the sanitation department. The way they treat people, like we're human beings. We're not animals. But, it's a thing where I don't appreciate the fact that someone should have to wait 6 years to find a home, or that DHS is dictating, oh, this is where you should live. This is where you should reside because this is all you're worth. DHS or any other entity shouldn't have the right to tell people where they should live. It's not like they're paying our rent. Yes, they may be providing a subsidy, but that still
Time.
doesn't give them the right.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harris. Do you want to say some concluding remarks?
Yes, I just wanted to say, just because they're providing a subsidy, whether it's Section 8 or City FEPS, does not give them the right to decide where one should live, period, or how one should live. It's a matter of just having the freedom to be able to have your own bathroom in your own space without being invaded and not, the doors here aren't even locked. My things have been stolen. So
Ms. Harris, can I ask, how long have you been in the DHS system?
since January of this year.
January of this year. Do you have a voucher yet? Or a
Yes, I
shopping
do.
letter from you do. Have you seen any apartments?
I've seen several. And the
And
problem, and I trust me when I tell you, I found the place. I'm very close to getting it, but I don't trust the staff here to follow through with what needs to be done next. I've already docu-signed a contingent lease as of Friday.
okay, that's good to know. That's good to know. Because yes, that's
Because
yeah,
I've been out every day. Like when I can get out and I'm not at a doctor's appointment, I'm out actively looking for housing. But I also was in the hospital this year for 2 months having heart surgery.
wow.
Yes.
I'm glad you're recovering.
Yes.
And I'm hopeful that that you'll have your own apartment soon.
So am I.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Harris. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thanks again, Ms. Harris. I'm going to now turn it over to Shams DeBaron. Councilmember Diaz, I want to acknowledge we see your hand raised. We're going to wait for questions from council members until after this panel is concluded. Over to Shams DeBaron.
Starting time.
Oh, Shams, I think you're muted.
Chair 11, I believe his audio is not connected.
Let's see.
All right, Shams, it seems like we are having technical difficulties and can't hear you. So in the meanwhile, while we figure out these technical difficulties, we'll move on to the next panelist and turn back to you afterwards. So I'm now going to turn it over to Sarah Wilson for testimony.
Starting time.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Wilson. Good morning. I'm very grateful to be here. I'm here representing the Safety Net Project out of the Urban Justice Center. I also do advocacy work with Vocal New York, The Homeless Can't Stay Home and The Homeless Can't Wait. My inspiration to be here comes from my over 2 years of being homeless in 5 different single adult homeless shelters, what I experienced, as well as what my sisters and brothers experienced and are still experiencing. This is not a me, this is a we. The topic of single adult homelessness is extremely broad. Well, I won't say there's been no change. I will acknowledge, like Councilmember Levin said, city FEP's increase in dollar amount and criteria eligibility. However, there's still a lot more that needs to be done. With the specific topic of congregate shelters and the setting, the evidence shows congregate shelters to be both ineffective and inhumane, yet we're still using that model. While COVID shows different and we still are in a pandemic. I was part of an excellent teach-in, which Shams was also a part of, with the medical community called Flipping the Script. Doctors, social workers, medical students, nurses collectively found it counterproductive for health, hygiene, mental health, and overall wellness. And at $4,000 a month per individual, when it only costs $2,000 less than for single adult shelter housing. I can speak of the lack of kitchen and food. I developed ulcerative colitis due to the lack of nutrition and stress. There were women in the shelters on dialysis, and because of these curfews, rain, snow, sleet, heat, you're in the street from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. You're locked out. You're locked in from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and there's no staff that works there. All cops, no counselors. If you miss a bed, you're bagged up and transferred to any borough if not sanctioned. Issue with this is that you have things like the other woman said going on where you need to attend certain services in certain boroughs. There still is no appeals process, nor is there a freeze against these transfers. Sorry. then we only got a minimum amount of reporting. 1 year later, when it's too late to fix the actual issues. The staff you employ is extremely petty. And while you refuse to create accountability, you give them the power to keep playing musical shelters because they're bored and they're miserable. I point these things out because they're a common issue throughout that can be corrected if there was a political will. While we're not confused about what the issues are, the advocates, the medical community, the community itself, it's known there are solutions, but there is not the political will to do so. So I hope with the people that are coming in next, the people that have not really understood this or have chosen not to, and Councilmember Levin, I know I give you a hard time, but I want to thank you for the city FEP stuff as well as the things for youth aging out. So thank you. I can't always harp on the negative. However, for the remaining members,
Time expired.
You could go ahead and finish, Sarah. It's okay.
thank you. I just want to say for the remaining members, whatever it's going to take for you to make these changes to improve the quality of life for the tens of thousands of people that are affected. That's all. Thank you so much. God bless. And hi, Shams.
Hello.
Thank
Can
you,
you hear
Sarah.
me now?
I can
Yes, we
hear
can.
you now, boy. That's a perfect
All right.
segue. Thank you, everybody. God bless.
All right, great. It sounds like Shams. Thank you, Sarah, for your testimony. Sounds like Shams, we do hear you. So I'm going to turn it now over to Shams for testimony.
All
Starting
right.
time.
All right. So with great people, I see some of my great peers here. So I know they're going to cover the issues and stuff. And I've been doing it for so long within this short amount of time. So I'm just going to just read a statement and go from there, if you don't mind.
Of course.
This is my first one, so, pardon me. First and foremost, I want to thank Steve Levin for inviting me to have a seat at this table before the City Council, Speaker Corey Johnson, and all the distinguished public servants who comprise our City Council. I'm humbled by the opportunity to come before you and provide testimony I hope would have a positive, inspiring impact on you all. My objective is to see us enter the new year proactively and address the city's issues as it pertains to housing and homelessness. I know it's a limited time, so forgive me for I'll get straight to the point. The city of New York is in a crisis. It ain't just a crisis brought on by the pandemic. We've been dealing with the crisis for quite some time, and we've been able to ignore it for quite some time. But the pandemic has exposed these issues in a way that is just hard to ignore. So today the conversations are difficult. The quest for solutions are challenging, but the need for our immediate attention and action is necessary. We have a mayor currently who speaks of his successes, but is reluctant to do a deep dive into his failings. This is not the way the rest of us need to go or should go. We need to face the reality of our failings. And I put myself in that because despite being homeless for many years in and out of shelters, from the family to single adult shelters, for many years I was suffering in silence, and that silence allowed for these issues to persist. I didn't understand that my voice had power, but the pandemic forced me to dig deep and decide to do as much as I could to change things for the better, to be a part of the solutions rather than a part of the problem. You, members of this council, servants of New York, are entrusted with the care of your constituents. You have a degree of power by way of your office to affect change in a way that benefits your communities and our city. Yet why are we declaring that racism in this city is a public health crisis? Why are we seeing the sustaining of a homeless/shelter industrial complex? Why are people not convicted who are not convicted of a crime dying on Rikers Island? Why can't tourists walk the streets without being attacked by someone who apparently needs a higher level of care? Why are the streets flooded with people who say they'd rather sleep in the dead of winter in the freezing cold than enter one of those congregate death traps you call a shelter? Why are there over 10,000 children in shelters throughout the city? Why do victims of domestic violence encounter so many barriers to receive help, safety, and security? Why are the children, like my own two daughters, aging out of foster care and either going into the streets or a shelter or worse? Why do you parole men and women who did their time to these unsafe and inhabitable shelters? Why do you feed us in those death traps like we're slaves on a plantation. And why, when we entered those shelters, it's like joining a gang or an organized crime family. Once you get in, you can't get out. Why have you let this happen? Why didn't you challenge this mayor and say, hell no, housing is a human right? No New Yorker will be unhoused under our watch. Well, we only got a few weeks left with this mayor, so I don't want to focus on him and his failures. I'd rather focus on the future. We are in a unique time. It's a time to be bold and courageous. It's a time to be caring and compassionate. We're still battling COVID and its variants, and we have the eviction moratorium being lifted, which will indeed present even more challenges. Some people are so embedded in the current way of things that the idea of change is so difficult. What I'd like for you to do moving forward is embrace and then attack the reality of racism being a public health crisis. Then understand that racism permeates throughout all levels of city, state, and federal policy. Whatever you can do to address this, you must do. Our housing and homelessness crisis is rooted in racism. It's been that way since the founding of this country. From redlining, segregation, and you know all the rest. Racism is at the root of all of this, and it is killing the majority of Black and Brown who are suffering due to these racist and inhumane policies. We got to end systemic, institutional, and structural systems of racism that are in our city government. We have an incoming mayor who seems to be open-minded and very concerned about moving in a different direction. I don't expect, nor do I want him or you to give me all that I want, because there are other people with different needs, and I don't want to see their needs unaddressed. I want to see housing first centered. We got to move away from the thinking that shelter first is a cure. More stabilization in beds and low barrier safe havens are needed. Cut the process from being homeless and entering a shelter to obtaining housing in half. Eliminate all the bureaucratic barriers that make it difficult to access housing. We did good in passing Intro 146, but we have to make the process easier for landlords to be attractive to the program. I have a coalition of landlords working with me to provide more than 1,000 apartments online in an instant to take advantage of their vouchers, but they have legitimate concerns. We have to address that. I want you all to stop stigmatizing the homeless. I am of that group, and I think that with this short period of time, I've shown that any one of us can rise up out of that condition to be part of the solutions. Give us a seat at the table, a voice in the discussion, and a hand in the decisions making. And now I'm gonna leave you with a quote from the great Dr. Martin Luther King. I stood up in a challenging time during the pandemic of the Lucerne Hotel, where we became the subject of controversy. So let's reflect on King's words, who said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." And I'm gonna take that he, and it could also be a she, or whatever you identify as. Thank you. I appreciate you, and please forgive me for going over the time.
Thank you very much, Shams. Thank you.
For your testimony. I'll turn it back over to Chair.
Okay, Council, is this the entire? Are there any more members of this committee? I mean,
we
that this.
We have
panel?
two more panelists for this panel.
I'll save my remarks till the end of the panel. But thank you, Shams.
Thanks, Chair Levin. I'm going to turn it now over to Althea Matthews for testimony.
Starting time.
To unmute. Hi, good afternoon. It's hard to go behind him. Thank you for allowing me to speak here. I don't have nothing written. I'm just going to go out from my head. My name is Althea Matthews. I'm part of Vocal as on the committee of the Homeless Union. I've been involved with that for a couple of years before I became homeless myself. I've been homeless for over 2 years now. I got burned out in 2019, December 30, after moving into a new location, December 1st. And then shortly after that, my father passed like 2 weeks after, and then I had to go to California and lost the first location I was put in after letting them know I'm just going to be there for 10 days. Anyway, I had to be relocated, and I had to show that I had my father's death certificate and plane ticket to be relocated to a new resident. I've been there since February the 3rd. I actually thought that Councilman Salamanca was going to be on here, as well as the incoming Brad Lander, you know, because with Salamanca's bill, the intro 1211, that was set aside for 15% units for any developer who had received incentive funding. I need that to be more transparent to how that is going as well. And so along with Salamanca Bill 1211, and I helped campaign for that bill as well. And with the House Our Future New York campaign, they had to go of 24,000 units that it can, to be able to help with this homeless crisis. I would like to know more about how that is going, because being in a shelter for 2 years, is saying, and other people I know been in much longer than I have, I don't see how that bill is moving forward, or at least have more transparency on that. And I know that Scott Stringer, the present controller, I know he mentioned about it was the city have over 600 vacant lots. My concern is why we can't build on some of these city lots to help with the homeless. I see that it's a easy solution. Yeah, the money that you spent to house us, that money can be allocated to build homes, as well as
Expired.
oh my God.
No, you can go ahead and finish. You can continue, Ms. Matthews.
Okay. My concern is, even with the Honda bill that is being passed, and I'm so thankful for all who has supported House Our Neighbor with Dignity Act to house people in these commercial and vacancy office buildings. Putting money into building on these vacant lots will help eliminate the homeless crisis. And I just would like to thank everybody for listening to my testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Matthews.
Thank you so much, Ms. Matthews, for your testimony. I'm going to turn it now over to our final panelist for this panel, Danique Martinez.
Starting time.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Danny Martinez, as you know. Thank you, City Council. Thank you, Mr. Levin. What's the name? What is the council? That's here that I testified in front of him last time. I don't know, he left. But anyway, Mr. Carl Levin. And thank you, Urban Justice, and my peers that I spoke today. Thank you, all of you, especially. I'm going to start by saying that I agree with this, what Starlight says, because we came from the same shelter. We are transferred from the same shelter to this shelter. I personally was approved for a single room location based, and they decided, DHS, they don't care, take it or leave it. We don't give a damn about you. They put me all the way down to JFK. And like, they don't care. And I mean, it's like, it's ridiculous. It's like, I want to talk so many issues, but I'm trying to summarize because we have so little time. The issues that we have is like HRA, which is connected to DHS. When people want to move and they found, let's say they found a place, HRA takes too damn long to process the payment. But before that, sometimes the shelters, clients get the documents and then fail to submit the documents. So it's a lot of things going on, like Mr. Chon was saying. Champs, I'm sorry, I mispronounced your name. This process has to be fixed. Also, the other thing is like the storage. I'm trying to say everything at once quickly. So the storage, you have a storage unit, you take the bill to the HRA, and HRA also takes too long to process. I have heard, one of the storage managers told me once that sometimes the check comes after the stuff has been thrown out or sold. And because of the irresponsibility and carelessness, and HRA and DHS are incompetent, irresponsible, careless, and inhumane. And when you complain at the shelter, these shelter companies like Canva, ICL, just to name it, it's a whole bunch of them that got so many shelters. They retaliate against the clients, and they make sure they make the life miserable. And a lot of us here, I'm here for many years, and I don't want to disclose because it's too much. It's like this I don't care. We got through so many mental illnesses, and your illnesses, your physicals gets worse because the way they treat you like they were pieces. I don't want to say the word SHIT. And I'm going to say this to the mayor and to some city council members. Like, you claim Black Lives Matter, people of color when you're running for office, but at the end of the day, you don't care. Over 60% of the homeless people are people of color, Black and brown. So that's a lie. You don't care. What else? And like I said, even white people are here. At the end of the day, all lives matter. And like I said, it's DHS just dictating. Even when you have a paper saying that you are approved location-based, they transfer to a place that you're not supposed to be. This way is too far, it's too dangerous, isolated. Like, for example, the lady who just spoke, Ms. Starlight, she has a walker, and just to walk on the isolated place, anybody can beat her or something, or steal from her. Especially the crime is on the rise. The crime is en español es el crimen está a la orden del día. Anybody can translate that sentence. So it's a lot. It's like late passes. Sometimes you have late passes for work. People got late passes. I witnessed people that they go to work late. When they come, the case manager failed to put a late pass, overnight pass, because they have to work, or for whatever reason, somebody, family member died. Come in, you think you're gonna come to your home, kind of home, to sleep? No, you have to go and deal with it. You know, you have a late pass, you miss bed, and you are curfew violated, and they treat you like a piece of garbage. Like I said, Miss Starlight was saying that these places are still fixing. Like a one time happening in other shelter I was transferred to from Canva to ICL, the place was still fixing, and one day the place flooded because the pipes were, I don't know, was it small pipes and needed big pipes, and they had to like water the whole building. And it's a lot. It's like I said, it's not properly set up. I don't know what much to say, but it's like, on the vouchers, most people, I don't know if Starlight forgot to tell you, but Starlight herself have applied to so many places. Some landlords don't want to take, as Mr. Chan was saying, that some landlords don't want to take this voucher because they think they're going to pay, and that is like, it's a risk. Thank you. And I spoke in front of Mr. Levin before. He knows me before, so.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Martinez. I appreciate your testimony very much.
Ms. Martinez, please.
Ms. Martinez, thank you. Thank you. And I just want to thank this panel for setting an important initial tone to this hearing, and making sure that we are holding this city accountable, all of us, this council accountable, this administration accountable. I think if there's one thing that I can kind of impart to whoever's coming after me as chair of this committee or incoming members of this committee, is that it's, accountability is not something to be afraid of. Accountability is not something to run away from. it is the essence of what we are here to do. We are accountable to the people of New York. We are accountable to the people. This is the Committee on General Welfare. That means the public good, and we are accountable to that public good. And so I want to thank all of you for holding us accountable. And I want to thank all of you for taking on leadership roles in your own personal life, in your own and on the issues that New Yorkers are facing, who are facing housing challenges. It's been, you all are doing this on your own time without any compensation. And you're doing it, and you've studied the system, and know the system as well as anybody else. And so I just appreciate very much everything that you bring to this, and for your willingness to come up with solutions and to present solutions, and not be deterred when people tell you no. And so I want to extend my appreciation. Okay, and I'll turn it back over to our committee councilman to Kilowan.
Thank you, Chair Levin. I do want to note that Councilmember Diaz did have her hand raised earlier. Councilmember Diaz, I don't know if you have any questions or remarks before we move on to the next panel. I think Councilmember Diaz needs to be unmuted.
Good morning. Thank you for unmuting me. I like to begin by thanking Chair Levin for bringing this conversation, to fruition. As many of you know, I come from the shelter system, and in coming from the shelter system, I bring baggage, and that baggage I'm grateful to have heard Ms. Martinez speak of my baggage, and also Sarah Wilson and Scarlett Harris, who started. For DHS, you're hearing it. For 12 months, I've been talking about the horrific situations that occur on a daily basis. If I'm correct, there were two organizations that were named here, ICL and Canva. I strongly suggest that before you give organizations more contracts, that we review the conversations, at least in our hearings. We have to stop. Enough is enough. This weekend, I happened to pass by a site in my community, and the garbage in front of it was horrific. If the garbage was outside of the building, that it was obviously there for more than one day, I could only imagine what the inside looked like. And unfortunately, one of the two organizations that was named today was one of them. So it's more of a statement. We need to stop. Enough is enough. I'm also very big on separating. And what I mean by separating is mental health is mental health. Physical health is physical health. The administration has the money and the power to make that difference. Our people are not sardines. You just don't ship us and pack us away. With all the shelters that are being placed, dumped in communities, why are we not paying attention to the zip codes and the addresses of where we're placing people? And then I'm also going to ask, before I finish my statement, as shelters are being closed down, could administration pay attention to where folks came from? No one should be by JFK when they're in East New York. We have enough. Again, thank you for allowing me to speak my piece. And for the advocates in the panel, let's keep fighting. I'm listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Diaz. Now going to turn over to our second panel. Our second panel for today is going to include representatives from the Department of Social Services, followed by council member questions, followed by public testimony. I'm now going to call on Molly Park, First Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Social Services, and Erin Drinkwater, Deputy Commissioner of Intergovernmental and Legislative Affairs at the Department of Social Services. Now going to administer the oath to the administration. When you hear your name, please respond once a member of our staff unmutes you. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions? First Deputy Commissioner Molly Park.
I do.
Thank you. Deputy Commissioner Drinkwater.
I do.
Thank you. I want to note that after members of the administration testify, I'll be turning over moderating to my colleague Natalie Omery, Policy Analyst for the Committee on General Welfare. First, Deputy Commissioner Park, you may begin once the Sergeant at Arms cues you.
You may begin.
Good morning. I want to thank the Committee on General Welfare for holding today's hearing and for the opportunity to testify. I am Molly Park, and I'm the First Deputy Commissioner at the New York City Department of Homeless Services. I'm joined by Erin Drinkwater, Deputy Commissioner for Intergovernmental and Legislative Affairs at the Department of Social Services. We appreciate the opportunity to discuss single adults experiencing homelessness in New York City and the steps this administration has taken to support our most vulnerable New Yorkers. At the outset, I want to acknowledge our DHS and contracted provider staff for their work at the front lines. They work each day to provide shelter and critical services to New Yorkers in need to help them get back on their feet. As we begin our discussion today on the state of single adult homelessness in New York City, we should acknowledge that the vast majority of people experiencing homelessness in our city are sheltered indoors across our shelter system because we have a right to shelter. That stands in stark contrast with other jurisdictions around the nation, particularly on the West Coast, where the proportion of unsheltered individuals experiencing homelessness on the street is exponentially greater than in New York City. To better understand this concept, it is important to understand the background that has brought us to this point and the steps that this administration has taken to address homelessness. Over the course of the last 40 years, New York City has been under court order to provide shelter to single adults and families experiencing homelessness. Against the backdrop of this legal and moral obligation to provide shelter from the elements, New York City saw steep increases in housing instability and decreases in housing affordability, with homelessness increasing by 115% between 1994 and 2014. In the decade between 2005 and 2015, household rents in the city increased by 18.4%, while at the same time, incomes failed to keep pace, only increasing by 4.8%. Looking at affordable housing supply, between 1994 and 2012, the city suffered a net loss of about 150,000 rent-stabilized units. As a result, by 2015, the city had only half the housing needed for about 3 million low-income New Yorkers. These trends, along with factors such as economic inequality, domestic violence, overcrowding, housing evictions, untreated mental health challenges, and inadequate discharge planning from state institutions have driven homelessness and displacement in our communities over the past several decades. Now, we want to update the committee on the progress that this administration has made to address homelessness and address the policy failures that have exacerbated challenges for vulnerable New Yorkers. While the devastating impacts of the factors mentioned earlier, along with inaction from prior administrations, have led to homeless conditions we face today, the New York City Department of Social Services, DSS, Human Resources Administration, HRA, and DHS are beginning to reverse that trend. Today, the DHS census stands at approximately 46,000, well below the level it was at the start of this administration at significantly less than the high point of more than 61,000. Without the administration's initiatives, projections indicate there would be 71,000 people in shelter today. This reduction in the DHS shelter census is driven by a substantial reduction in the number of families experiencing homelessness and residing in shelter. The peak number of individuals across those families declined by more than 17,000 people between 2014 and today. Our agency has taken aggressive action to break and reverse the trajectory of an ever-increasing DHS shelter census over the past several decades, such as restoring the city's rental assistance and rehousing programs. We have directed unprecedented resources towards a new comprehensive and holistic approach to fighting homelessness, focused on prevention, including expanded civil legal services for tenants, outreach and support for unsheltered New Yorkers, closing substandard shelter facilities, expanded transitional housing options, improved shelter conditions, and more robust housing and aftercare services. In February 2017, the mayor announced Turning the Tide on Homelessness in New York City, a neighborhood by neighborhood blueprint for transforming a shelter system that was built up in a haphazard way over 4 decades. This plan takes the reforms that resulted from the 90-day homeless services review in 2016 even further, finally ending the use of ineffective stopgap measures and Band-Aid approaches that date back decades, and replacing them with a smaller number of high-quality, borough-based transitional housing facilities. The Turning the Tide plan consists of 4 core pillars. 1, preventing homelessness wherever we can. 2, rehousing families and individuals so they can move out of shelter or avoid homelessness altogether. 3, addressing unsheltered homelessness. And 4, transforming the haphazard approach to providing shelters and services that has built up over the last 4 decades. Our strategies have taken hold and are headed in the right direction. To highlight this, we have made the following progress under each pillar. Pillar 1, preventing homelessness wherever we can. This administration has aggressively expanded free legal assistance for New Yorkers in danger of illegal eviction, increasing funding for legal services for tenants more than 25-fold, from roughly $6 million in 2013 to $166 million in FY22, which is the largest annual investment ever by a mayoral administration in legal services for tenants. Evictions then dropped by 41% pre-pandemic, and thousands of New Yorkers were able to stay in their homes from 2014 through 2019 because of reduced evictions. Moreover, we have dramatically expanded legal representation for tenants. By 2020, 100% of tenants with calendared eviction cases had access to legal services, and 71% of tenants who appeared in housing court had full representation by an attorney. Nearly double the pre-pandemic rate of 38% and an exponential increase over the 1% of tenants who had lawyers in 2013. Overall, more than 500,000 New Yorkers have received free legal representation, advice, or assistance in eviction and other housing-related matters since 2014. Amid the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic, DSS's Right to Counsel program has continued to be a vital tool for protecting New Yorkers during this crisis and helping them keep their homes. Since the outset of the pandemic, DSS has worked closely with our dedicated legal service provider partners on a range of immediate comprehensive steps to ensure New Yorkers can access this vital resource. Furthermore, during the pandemic, and as now codified in local law, legal services offered to New Yorkers via the Right to Counsel program are now available citywide, regardless of zip code, with an eviction defense legal services available to all tenants in the city facing eviction in housing court, as well as NYCHA residents in termination of tenancy proceedings. Pillar 2, progress rehousing families and individuals. Immediately upon taking office, the de Blasio administration stepped in to fill the gap left by the city and state's cancellation of the Advantage Rental Assistance Program in 2011 by creating and implementing new rental assistance programs, as well as reinstating rehousing programs. Through September 2021, these initiatives have helped more than 175,000 children and adults remain in or secure permanent housing. The vast majority, more than 145,000, moving out of shelter into housing. As a result of these rehousing initiatives and the pre-pandemic efforts to reduce evictions by 41%, the number of people residing in DHS shelter is now well below where it was when this administration began. Move-outs to permanent housing have continued during the pandemic, thanks to the incredible work of our essential staff and not-for-profit provider partners who reported for duty every day throughout this crisis and did extraordinary work, going above and beyond in unprecedented and challenging circumstances. Pillar 3 progress, addressing unsheltered homelessness. Since the start of HomeStat, the most comprehensive outreach program in the nation, outreach teams have helped more than 4,200 New Yorkers experiencing unsheltered homelessness off the streets citywide, thanks to unprecedented new investments and expanding the size of those teams. As part of the city's 24/7, 365 outreach efforts, hundreds of highly trained, not-for-profit outreach staff, including licensed social workers and nurses, canvass the streets proactively engaging New Yorkers experiencing homelessness. These dedicated outreach teams offer services and assistance, working to gain individuals' trust with the goal of addressing the underlying issues that may have caused or contributed to their homelessness, all to ultimately help these individuals transition off the streets. Since 2014, the city has redoubled outreach efforts, dedicating unprecedented new resources to outreach programs and providers. This administration has tripled the number of outreach staff engaging New Yorkers on the street since 2014, from fewer than 200 to more than 600. Those dedicated staff canvass the streets every day, building relationships over weeks and months through regular contact and concerted engagement with New Yorkers experiencing homelessness, focused on encouraging them to accept services and transition off the streets. The city has more than quintupled the number of emergency safe haven and stabilization beds dedicated to serving unsheltered New Yorkers citywide since taking office. Thousands of these specialized beds have opened during this administration, bringing the total up from 600 in 2014 to more than 3,000 open today, with hundreds more planned. Moreover, we have increased the joint outreach operations to engage more New Yorkers and offer more support, including expanding joint outreach operations with partner agencies such as New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, the Parks Department, Department of Sanitation, and the Metropolitan Transportation Authority to address conditions as they occur and provide alternative pathways to permanence. Pillar 4 progress, transforming the shelter system. The administration has prioritized transforming and improving the shelter system, and these efforts are reflected by our closing of more than 290 shelter sites that did not meet our standards out of 647 sites reported in the Turning the Tide plan, thus decreasing the New York City shelter footprint by 45%. We've also recently completely phased out the city's use of cluster units, ending the 21-year-old Giuliani era program that at its high point included more than 3,600 units through innovative strategies such as converting cluster units to permanent affordable housing and outright closure of other units. We continue to address decades of disinvestment and restore our infrastructure through aggressive repairs, renovations, and funding. Over the past several years since the 2016 launch of the Shelter Repair Squad and the subsequent release of the Turning the Tide plan, the Mayor's Interagency Shelter Repair Squad Task Force has conducted more than 63,000 shelter inspections, driving down violations in shelter that went unaddressed for many years by more than 94% to an all-time low. We have also allocated millions of dollars to address remaining violations. While this administration continues to address homelessness and improve conditions for vulnerable New Yorkers, it is important to understand the fiscal landscape affecting funding for our services. New York City has continued to increase investment to prevent and alleviate homelessness, while the state has continued a multi-year trend of disinvesting in services to address homelessness and walking away from its responsibility to support New Yorkers experiencing homelessness, resulting in significant cost shifts to city programs and services. At the city level, we will continue to invest in proven successful programs this administration created from the ground up, which will help even more individuals and families avert shelter entry and/or find affordable apartments that work for them. For example, the council and administration have taken action this year to set rent levels for the 100% city-funded City for HEPS program at the same levels as the NYCHA Section 8 payment standard. And our agency implemented the increase ahead of schedule and with reforms to address the quote income cliff, affecting continued eligibility for families and individuals with increased employment income. State legislation to do the same for rent levels for the state FEPS program has passed the Assembly and Senate. We hope the state will step up in kind to ensure state vouchers remain competitive, protect state voucher holders from being left behind, and join us in this mission, which can only be resolved by collaborating across all levels of government. As we testified at this year's council budget hearings, the state has steadily disinvested in efforts to address homelessness in New York City over the past decades, which historically was an obligation evenly shared by both levels of government. Independent experts who have analyzed this dynamic for years have identified this pattern of state disinvestment. For example, the New York City Independent Budget Office reported that changes implemented in Albany have reduced the state's contribution to fund shelters for single adults, leaving the city to fund the increased costs associated with the rising adult shelter population. Likewise, in a report measuring state disinvestment in homeless services, the IBO highlighted that as the city invests in improved shelter infrastructure and a more holistic approach to homeless services, the state's combined contribution dropped pre-pandemic to a 9% share of homeless services in New York City. The state's diminishing support for these critical services is dire, and we have continued to call for a fair share of funding to help New Yorkers experiencing homelessness get back on their feet. Looking further back, beginning in the 1990s, New York State capped the funding it provides to New York City for sheltering single adults. Not only has the state failed to proportionally increase that funding as homelessness increased over the past several decades, but has progressively cut the cap, and with inflation, the value of the state share has eroded even more. Before the implementation of the cap in the 1990s, the state reimbursed 50% of the cost of sheltering single adults. During the Giuliani and Bloomberg administrations, as shelter and street populations continued increasing, the state continued cutting funding, which then meant that by 2005, the state contribution had shrunk to 35% of costs. Today, funding provided by the state has dropped to just 9% of spending on single adult shelter services, with costs and responsibilities shifting significantly to the city. New York continues to shoulder the associated increases every year, despite the fact that the court-ordered right to shelter across New York State is based on the New York State Constitution that applies to both the state and the city. This has led to substantial cost shifts of millions of dollars over many years from the city to the state, requiring the city to take on more and more fiscal responsibility that has impacted the city's resources to deliver support to New Yorkers in need. It is also worth noting that the state set public assistance rent allowance for a single adult is $215 per month, a grossly inadequate amount for rent payments in New York City that has not increased in several decades and fails to keep up with the increasing rent costs. The $215 state set rent allowance for single adults is a major driver of single adult homelessness in New York City and across the state. We have repeatedly called on the state to support services to address homelessness by restoring the state's traditional 50-50 cost split for shelter and other services to address homelessness for single adults in New York City. Outreach workers, safe havens, stabilization beds, and the cost of homeless services for the overnight MTA initiative. Nevertheless, despite the fact that a consent decree enforcing the state constitution obligates both the state and the city to provide shelter to single adults experiencing homelessness, the state has steadily reduced its support to address single adult homelessness in New York City from 50-50 to a mere 9%. Moreover, the state provides $0 to support the more than 600 outreach workers who help unsheltered New Yorkers and the more than 3,000 safe haven and stabilization beds that the city has funded that have enabled more than 4,200 people to come off the streets and subways and remain off since 2016. To summarize this simply, the state must return to paying its fair share for life-saving services for single adults experiencing homelessness. Even as the overall DHS shelter census and the number of children and adults in family shelters has been reduced significantly, there are record numbers of people in DHS single adult shelters, and state support is critically needed. I want to pivot now to talk about state parolees in shelter. New York City DHS has invested more than $250 million annually in our not-for-profit social service provider partners who operate shelters to enhance the services they provide to New Yorkers in need, including increased investment for mental health services. As I mentioned earlier, in our city, all people experiencing homelessness have a right to shelter, and we are committed to providing shelter to any New Yorker experiencing homelessness who needs it, regardless of their background, including criminal justice involvement. Along with the affordable housing crisis, including the $215 state set monthly public assistance rent allowance for single adults. A driver of the single adult DHS census growth is the state's failure to invest in reentry services to prevent discharges from state prisons to DHS shelters. Tragically, history is repeating itself. Just as state deinstitutionalization from state mental health facilities without sufficient community mental health services has contributed to modern day mass homelessness for single adults. Now state decarceration without sufficient community reentry services is resulting in a state prison to shelter pipeline. As a result, at any given time, there are approximately 1,500 state parolees residing in DHS shelters. The state sends these individuals directly to DHS shelter, even when they have housing options available to them. Instead of discharging parolees directly from state prisons to shelter, the state needs to invest in a real reentry program, so individuals don't need to go straight from state prison to the city shelter. The state should work directly with parolees as part of their release process to assist them in reintegrating into society, including identifying suitable housing where they may be supported. Fact is, this sequence of events is preventable with better discharge planning and re-entry services by the state, which provides a little oversight on whether discharged individuals have viable housing options to help them get back on their feet. Now I'd like to shift to updating the committee on our services for New Yorkers experiencing unsheltered homelessness. Since the start of Homestat, the most comprehensive outreach program in the nation, outreach teams have helped more than 4,200 New Yorkers experiencing unsheltered homelessness off the streets citywide, thanks to unprecedented new investments and more than tripling the staffing of those teams. As you know, as part of the city's 24/7, 365 outreach efforts, hundreds of highly trained not-for-profit outreach staff, including licensed social workers, canvass the streets, proactively engaging New Yorkers experiencing unsheltered homelessness, offering services and assistance, working to gain their trust with the goal of addressing the underlying issues that may have caused or contributed to their homelessness in order to ultimately help these individuals transition off the street. Since 2014, the city has redoubled outreach efforts, dedicating unprecedented new resources to outreach programs and providers, including actions such as more than tripling the number of outreach staff canvassing the streets, engaging New Yorkers 24/7, 365, from fewer than 200 to more than 600, as mentioned earlier. More than quintupling the number of emergency safe haven and stabilization beds dedicated to serving unsheltered New Yorkers citywide from 600 to more than 3,000. Expanding the availability of drop-in centers for New Yorkers experiencing unsheltered homelessness, with 6 city-funded drop-in centers in operation 24/7, including 1 in each of the 5 boroughs, with 2 additional drop-in centers planned to open in Manhattan. And lastly, increasing the joint interagency street outreach operations to engage more New Yorkers and offer more supports. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today and provide updates on our efforts to support New Yorkers experiencing homelessness. I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you to the administration for your testimony. My name is Natalie Omari. I'm a policy analyst to the Committee on General Welfare, and I'm going to be taking over moderating for the remainder of the hearing. Before I turn to Chair Levin for questions, I just want to remind the council members to use the raise hand function in Zoom to indicate that they have a question for the panel. Please remember to keep your questions and answers to 5 minutes, and panelists from the administration, if you're able to stay unmuted for the duration of Q&A. I will now turn it over to Chair Levin for any questions he has for the administration. Chair Levin.
Thank you very much, Moderator Omari. I appreciate it. Thank you, Deputy Commissioner, for your testimony. So I'll start off by agreeing with you that the state disinvestment in homeless services over the past 10 years has been disgraceful. Now that the Cuomo era is officially over, I think that we can say conclusively that the legacy of the Cuomo administration at the state level, when it comes to homeless services, has been a record disinvestment. I can't frankly think of a single positive thing that they contributed in the sphere of homeless services at all in New York City, at least. And they did a tremendous amount of damage. And I think that, history will confirm that. But, I think that you're absolutely right to point that out and to insist on making sure that that is clear. Going back to Governor Cuomo's very first budget in 2011, when the first thing he did was cut the state share of Advantage from, I think it was something like $100 million to zero, maybe even more, maybe like 120 to zero, and putting that entire burden on the city. And we all know what happened after that. So I acknowledge all of that. That said, I want to ask some questions about the administration's, what's happened during this administration when it comes to single adult homelessness. And so the first question is just, it's, looking at the population of in shelter for single adults, when this administration took over, it was roughly 11,500 single adults in shelter. That increased to a high of 20,822, which would have been I think it was February of 2021 was the high point of that census. That is since decreased by about 2,000 or 2,500. But if you could explain why that size, that's an increase of almost 100%. Why do you think that is?
Sure. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I think some of which I touched on in my testimony, that there are breakdowns in discharge at planning with the criminal justice system over the last, I think, year and a half. About 28% of the growth in the single adult shelter population has been with criminally justice involved individuals. There's a lot of positives to the trend towards reducing incarceration, but it needs to be done in a thoughtful way. So I think there's, as I say, trends on who is coming into the shelter system, but I also think that there are real structural mismatches in the housing stock, just across all income levels, but everything is always more pronounced when you're talking about the need for deeply affordable housing. The numbers are something like 65% of households in New York City are 1 and 2 people, and about a third of the housing stock in New York City is studio and 1 bedrooms. So you have that is, again, across the board. That doesn't distinguish between, what is affordable housing and not affordable housing. But on the most macro level, it's very difficult for a single person to find housing. And when you compound that with the need to find affordable housing, that is just a tremendous challenge. And I think that has a lot to do with what you're saying.
But I just want to ask about, and you spoke about this in your testimony, the state's responsibility for discharge planning on parole. But was there a policy change that occurred in the early 2010s that was different, that somehow change that trajectory, because the rapid increase over the last 8 years, there has to be a policy that is connected to.
Well, I should be clear that I'm not attributing the entire growth in the single adult shelter system to criminal justice policies. I do think overall there has been a move towards reduced incarceration. Again, I think there's many good reasons for that.
But that's not
without
parole. I mean, that's not a parole thing. That's a reduced incarceration, meaning we're not having people detained at Rikers as much as we used to, and that's not a discharge. That in that instance, there's no state touch point at all, right? I mean, then we're not, then the Department of Parole is not responsible for that.
Well, but this is true. I think it's true across multiple levels of the criminal justice system. Again, I'm not criticizing the overarching policy, but I'm talking about the extent to which it was done in a thoughtful and planned measure. But it's not the only factor, right? There are, I talked early on in my testimony, right, about growth in income relative to growth in rents, right? That is harder to absorb. Those are global factors, but it is harder to absorb if you're an individual than if you're a family, because you qualify for fewer income supports there, right? There's many of the systems that we have, whether it is different forms of cash assistance, various rental subsidies, right, are really oriented towards families. So you have a population that has been impacted by all of the national economic forces of growing income inequality, the local factors of reduction in rent stabilized housing, and yet they qualify for fewer resources. The shelter allowance isn't adequate for the state shelter allowance isn't adequate for any family size, but the $215 for singles is particularly remarkable.
So, okay. I mean, the other data point that I think is important to point out here is the average length of stay and how that has gone over the last 8 years. So I'll read that off here. This is for single adults. I think it was in 2013 or 14, it was 305 days average length of stay in the single adult system, 329, 355. This is year over year. This is from the MMR. 305, 329, 355, 383, 401, 414, 431, 476. So we went from 305 to 476. An increase of about, about 60% maybe, and just in length of stay. But so, I look at length of stay as a really important indicator, because that directly affects your census. If you have longer stays, you're going to have a greater population in shelter because you're not having exits. And frankly, I got to say, we did this. You mentioned that the supports are not there necessarily for vouchers that for single individuals. I mean, I had a hearing in this committee about the level of rent that the city FEPS voucher at the time, and it was the link vouchers, but the level of rent that it was that it met in the percentage of FMR. And I mean, frankly, this administration fought me on that for years. It's not like Intro 146 was an easy bill to pass. I didn't have a lot of support from this administration, and I had a hearing in 2017 about it. I went back. I recently found some of information that some of the paperwork from that hearing. So we were talking about this from 2017 to 2021, and it took that amount of time. Now I realize, like, I get it. It's frustrating that the state was not contributing. I get that, but when we're seeing the average length of stay go up from 305, 476, you have to do something. And so my frustration is that, it took that long. And so we then have this average length of stay that goes from 305 to 476, and a population that goes from 11,000 to 20,000. And it took all of that time to just increase to fair market rent so that we can have a viable exit program.
So, Councilmember, I don't disagree with you that the length of stay is longer than we would like it to be. I'm just simply not going to argue on that point. I think there is a lot of work that we have done over the years, right? We move out, and this goes back a long time, right? 200 households a week, every week, into subsidized housing, right? We've done out of the shelter system about 145,000 individuals since the start of this administration, right? So moving out to permanent housing is an ongoing priority and something that we work hard at. We appreciate the work that you have done with Intro 146, and I think the way that we showed that appreciation was that we started the CAPA process as soon as the bill was passed, had some really positive dialogue with and back and forth with many, including yourself, on ways that we could make the rule process better. One of the really important changes that we made during that CAPA process was to change ongoing eligibility for people whose income goes up while they are receiving city FHAPs, and we implemented it before the date required in the bill. One of the other things that we did in that bill in the CAPA process that I am personally excited and really proud about is that we created a project-based version of city FHAPs so that that allows the city FHAPs dollars to be used to leverage development funding for ongoing permanent housing, the way that project-based Section 8 can be used. It's in its early days. We're working with the affordable housing community to actually put this into place, but I think this has an opportunity to be a game changer, to leverage social service dollars to create permanent housing, because I cannot argue with you. This has been the guiding force of my career, that what this city needs is more affordable housing. And just one last point that I want to make in response to your questions. I wasn't at DHS in 2017 when those conversations, but I was at HPD. And one of the things that we heard from council members, from communities over and over again, as we would bring new projects to, potential projects to communities, was that they wanted more family units and fewer small units. That was always the push. And I think it really gets back to this mismatch that I was talking about earlier. We need more units of lots of different types for singles and for couples, or small families. I shouldn't necessarily say couples. There's a lot of configurations there, but we all need to work together as a city to make sure that we are developing the units that can serve people other than your traditional, mom, dad, and 2 kids, because that's not necessarily reflective of New York City. And I'm really excited for the opportunity to use project-based city FHAPs to do that.
No, absolutely. I agree with that. I think what we don't need in terms of affordable housing are a lot of single units at 80% of AMI, or 100% of AMI, or 130% of AMI. We need single units for 40% of AMI and 30% of AMI and 50% of AMI, but we don't need it at those higher income levels because that's not helping people coming out of shelter. I mean, eventually we would hope that somebody is making 80% of AMI, but that's actually now the rule of when City FEPS phases out is at 80%. When you're making 80% of AMI, you're doing all right. It's about $60,000, $65,000 a year. So as a single adult. So I think that is what we need. And so, I mean, I think that what I'm curious about actually is, do we know exactly how many, do we have clear reporting about the number of exits out of the shelter system into subsidized units, like in HPD units? Is that reported out in a detailed way?
We can get that information for you. I don't have it right at my fingertips, but we can follow up.
So actually, I wanted to ask, because in September, we had a hearing on Intro 149 and Intro 1642. 149 is kind of a reporting of all of the shelter systems, in a single place, so that we get a comprehensive picture of the people that are unstably housed in the city, and are in some form of city shelter, HPD shelter, DHS shelter, DYCD shelter, HRA shelter. And so that's one bill. The other bill is around comprehensive reporting of exits out of the city shelter systems. As you probably know, the final aging deadline. So in the hearing in September, you guys testified that you wanted to work with me on these bills. Said, we want to make sure that they're not redundant and they're not, that there's that the reporting is, for stuff that you have access to, so you're not forced to report on stuff you don't have access to, and that it's not doing stuff that I guess is already done elsewhere. Although I don't know why that's necessarily a problem, because you could get the information. Then I don't mind duplicate information. That's not my biggest worry in the world is having too much information. Yeah. So I have 36 hours now between now and the final aging deadline for legislation in my entire tenure in the New York City Council, all 12 years. Can I get a commitment from you guys now that you'll work with me over the next 36 hours on language on these two bills so that they can be aged to be passed on the 15th of December?
I'm going to ask Erin to chime in, since she is the one who would presumably be actually doing that work. Erin,
just want to remind you of the testimony in September, which was that you wanted to work with me on it.
No, and that stands to be the case. We had not heard from your office on any red lines, but if you want to work with us, we're happy to do that. I understand the time constraints here. We did testify in September that we wanted to make sure that it wasn't duplicative. One of the challenges from the way we see it in terms of duplicative reports is, it is more work for staff when we might be able to streamline the additional metrics into a single report. Local Law 37 of 2011 established the streamlined reporting process for the multi-agency report. The additional requirements in 1642 didn't add any burden to operations in terms of reporting. And in regards to 149, again, we just want to make sure that that data is reported in such a way that it's useful to the public, it's useful to the committee, and the council as a whole, and then certainly reflective of the agency's work. So we look forward to talking to you more about these.
Okay, because if I get them to you like this afternoon, we can, because this is it. This is the after tomorrow night. I can't pass any more bills, and so I gotta get this to you. We have to have an agreement by tomorrow night. Is that fair?
Understood. We
that?
can work with City Ledge as we always do.
Okay. All right. Because I just want I want to be clear that we have a commitment that we're going to do this. So is that a yes?
We are absolutely happy to collaborate on this.
Okay. All right. We'll get something over. I'll get you red lines today, like in the next couple hours. You should have it by, within a half an hour after this hearing is over. Okay. I want to acknowledge Councilmember Salamanca is with us. He sponsored the legislation on having set-asides in HPD projects. Councilmember Salamanca, do you have any questions you want to ask the administration? He also happens to be our land use chair. All right, I don't see any from Councilmember Salamanca. So, Commissioner Park, I just want to go back to just asking about the length of stay. Why do you think so? So the length of stay wouldn't be driven by people exiting state facilities and parolees. What do you think is driving? Because that's an ever increasing number, and it's been a pretty kind of consistent trajectory in terms of that increase in length of stay. What do you think is driving, when you guys are examining this from a policy shop and from a data shop, what conclusions are you drawing from that data?
So let me give you my analysis. I will preface this by saying, this is my analysis as somebody who works in this space, but it's not likely the only interpretation that one could put on these data. The way length of stay is calculated, it is the average length of stay for the people who are in the system at a given point in time, right? As opposed to the average length of stay for the number of people who move through the system. And I'm not sure if that's totally clear, but if you have, a number of people who come through and cycle through the system relatively quickly, and then you have a few people who stay in shelter for a very long period of time, the length of stay figure is really driven by those people who are staying for a longer period of time. So my interpretation here, and again, I think this is something that we could discuss further, but is that we have tools that are helping people who can move relatively quickly. We have some tools that are helping them to move relatively quickly, but that there's also a universe of individuals with, for a whole slew of reasons, more significant barriers to moving out of shelter, right? And that can be, there were some allusions to, landlords' reactions to taking particular rent subsidies, or landlords' reactions to people with different kinds of backgrounds, right? There is absolutely fair housing concerns that come into this. It is particularly hard for us to help individuals who don't have a full documentation access permanent housing, right? But so you have a universe of people for whom, for a constellation of reasons, it is harder for them to move to permanent housing, and they are staying longer. And given the way that this particular metric is calculated, sort of their increasing length of stay in the system skews the whole metric, even when you have sort of people who might still a reasonable number of people who are moving relatively quickly, right? What you have is not necessarily all the people in the system staying the 400 plus days. You have a large number of people staying a short period of time, and then unfortunately a universe of people staying much longer.
But what I don't understand is, okay, so, but why would it be ever increasing? Like it's not plateauing. It's not like it's like, something has to continue to drive that number higher. Like, it's not like it went from 300 days to 400 days and then just stayed at 400 days. It continued to climb to 476. It's ever increasing. And so that's something is driving. Something has to be different today than it was 2 years ago. And something 2 years ago has to be different than it was 4 years ago, right?
So if you have a lot of people who are, and this is a hypothetical example here, but if you have a lot of people who are staying 200 days, right, you're gonna have an average and a median that look more like one another, right? If what you have is many people who are moving fairly quickly and many people at the tail end, at the staying longer, right? If you've flattened out that curve somewhat so that you have then the weight carried by the people at the longer end of that length of stay curve is one that carries more weight. I think.
So if you were going to do a median, you anticipate that the median would be much lower than the 476? Statistically significantly lower?
I would anticipate that. I think this is something that I am happy to take back to the folks on our team who do research. I realize that given your time frame, that's probably not a very satisfying answer, but I think this is something that we can certainly dig back into.
What I would have hoped is that this would have, that you guys would have seen this yourselves and been like, what is going on here? That it is, this is your public indicator on the MMR. It's like, you can't get any kind of more cursory than that. It's not like, this isn't like detailed stuff. And, it's just like, that is a huge source. That is the reason why I called this hearing. That is the reason why I called this hearing, is because I want to know why that number of the length of stay combined with the overall increase, where we've seen the family census. I mean, let's put a pin in the last 18 months, okay? Because it's like, that's not indicative. There's been an eviction moratorium, so that's, maybe it can maybe help to be a great reset if we can really flood the zone with prevention measures when the moratorium is lifted. We can keep everybody in their home, and we can take advantage of what the moratorium did to keep the census lower. Like, that would be, I'm not saying, but it's been that is an extraordinary tool that has never been and never will be, likely outside of a pandemic, another pandemic available to us again, is like an entire eviction moratorium. So you don't have evictions happening in the city of New York for 2 years. So I think that what we would really want to look at in terms of policy is what was happening up until February of 2020. So that's, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that there's going to be a real answer before I leave the council, but it is something that I would hope there would be like a huge amount of urgency around what is going on here, because it is not leveling out.
So there was a lot there for me to respond to. Let me try. I think with the families with children system, I mean, you did see leveling off and reductions even pre-pandemic. We have We continue to invest in housing, and this is both for families with children and for single adults, right? Investing in the housing resources, making sure that city FAHPS is widely available. And again, we are greatly appreciative of the higher rent numbers that you spearheaded. We are with families, we are in addition to city FAHPS, we connect people to NYCHA units, we connect people to HPD units. We are these days pushing very hard on the emergency housing vouchers that were created through the American Rescue Act. A lot of those same tools apply to singles, less so than NYCHA housing, but certainly EHV, supportive housing. It is an incredibly important tool for single adults. We are connecting them there. We try very hard to be creative and to look for housing opportunities, and I think that's why I keep coming back to it, but I'm really excited about this opportunity to use social service dollars to actually create permanent housing and create affordable housing opportunities, because I do think that is, creating more opportunities is the end goal. You mentioned at one point the difference in incomes that are in some of those single units that might get created that are affordable, but affordable at the higher end of the spectrum. We've worked with HPD on what we call our enhanced city FAHPS, where we are able to use city FAHPS to help clients access units that were financed, that do have an HPD regulatory agreement, but at the higher end of the spectrum, and we're placing clients directly from our system into those units. So we are looking at every opportunity. We have been collaborating with our housing partners, and really working hard to make sure that there are as many opportunities for move out of the shelter system as possible.
If someone's experiencing street homelessness, can they have access to safe haven, without having to do the 9 months being seen 3 different times requirement that we had been hearing about for all these years?
Yeah, the safe havens, while they are emphasize serving clients experiencing chronic street homelessness, if an outreach provider identifies a client that they think is a particularly good fit for a safe haven, we can work with them and get that client into that particular unit, that bed, and then the stay beds are much more flexible as well. So there are an array of these lower barrier units that are serving the full spectrum of clients experiencing unsheltered homelessness.
Do you see, and this is within the context of COVID and also not in the context of COVID, do you see reluctance to go into congregate shelter as a major barrier for people getting off the street?
No, I don't think it is the major barrier, right? I mean,
a major barrier?
I think it is a barrier. I think there are people who have perceptions of what the shelter system that may be that are their own perceptions for a variety of reasons, their own
likely
concerns.
Lived experience.
Maybe it can be lived experience. It may or may not have been, current lived experience, but could very well be lived experience. The intake process can be daunting. One of the things that we did as part of when the subway system shut down last year, and we significantly increased our presence at the end of line stations, was that we set up a remote intake process so that clients who were on the subways who wanted to come into the shelter system could bypass intake. That is bypass the 30th Street site. That is something that operationally is challenging to do on a large scale. Like, there are real reasons to do intake. One of the very basic ones these days, we are doing COVID testing at the intake sites and have caught hundreds of cases of COVID at intake before they get into the shelter system, right? So there's real reasons to have intake, but we also understand that, it can be daunting. So we have set up some workarounds. So we actually see many clients coming from the street into the traditional shelter system, but for other people, it is not the right fit. We are very conscious that we do not run a one-size-fits-all system. And for other safe havens and stabilization beds are the right option.
Do you think that, and this could be in the context of COVID and not in the context of COVID, do you think that congregate shelters are a safe place to be?
Yes. I think, again, it is not a one-size-fits-all option. There are people for whom a congregate space is not the right option for a variety of different reasons. And we do have a system with a lot of diversity of beds, right? While we have about 5,000 single adult clients in commercial hotels right now, looking at my notes, about 1,500 of those are COVID, right? A small piece of that is isolation and quarantine, but the majority of those 1,500 beds are clients who have reasonable accommodations related because they have underlying conditions that put them at greater risk for COVID. Which can be something as basic as age. We have offered all our seniors single or double rooms depending on age, but it could also be an underlying medical condition. So we do not run a one-size-fits-all system, right? We have to have a diversity of options within that system, but there is a real place for congregate shelter. It needs to be done in a way that is thoughtful, where we are prioritizing safety. I think we have a lot of providers who have a great track record doing that, and we anticipate that congregate shelter will continue to be an ongoing part of our portfolio.
I can tell you, pretty conclusively at this point, after chairing this committee for 8 years, that no client is going to prefer a congregate shelter over a more private setting, a safe haven or a stabilization bed. And that's a consistent thing I've heard. I can't think of a single person that would tell me that a congregate is more suitable to them. And this is before COVID, let alone after COVID, where I still don't think it's wise to have, people in an open air setting sleeping. You can't sleep with a mask on, especially with Omicron happening. Same case with Delta. I'm not gonna rehash that or relitigate that, but I think that you guys are proposing a safe haven in my district of 140 beds on Apollo Street in Greenpoint. I wholeheartedly support that, and I'm doing everything I can to make sure that is far enough along before I leave office, because I had a pretty stressful, Aaron was with me there, pretty stressful meeting with the neighbors in the late summer, but it is, I think, very important to do. I think that we should be aiming towards long-term getting out of congregate shelter entirely and giving people that dignity that goes along with a safe haven or stabilization setting that is so much more beneficial to their lives. And I think that you would hear this from, I see that Eric Eric Rosenbaum is here. I mean, I think that he could probably speak to that from Project Renewal's perspective. But in any event, I think that it's I think that you know, as my kind of parting thoughts to this administration, if you guys are going to continue in the next administration or the next people in your roles, you know, that is if the more we invest in quick exits from shelter, rapid rehousing as much as possible, reducing that length of stay, and providing the shelter that we do have within the system in a way that really emphasizes and stresses people's dignity, I think is where I think the shelter system ought to go.
We are very grateful for your support on the Apollo site. Thank you for that. And, you know, I will say for many people, there are benefits to some of the smaller, less dense settings. We've also system-wide seen an increase in overdoses, right? There are downsides. I think what I take away from this is we cannot have a one-size-fits-all system. To the extent that we want to pivot it more towards lower density settings, we would be more than happy to work with your successors and the rest of the council's successors on the increased numbers of shelter sightings that we would need to do to be able to do that. I think it's something that we would be happy to have further conversations with the larger council about.
Okay, on overdoses, and I really haven't seen the latest data on the last, you know, since the COVID hotels have been in place. So I just would note that you know, the number of overdoses in New York City has increased dramatically in the last 2 or 3 years across the city. I mean, we're over 2,000 overdoses deaths a year now. We were, you know, a little over 1,000 a couple of years ago, and actually, there's some data that says that there were a decrease in overdoses in the hotels. But we could get to that data. I haven't seen that data, but I can tell you that across the city, I mean, this is related to fentanyl. It's not. I don't think it's related to people. It shouldn't be the rationale for a congregate shelter shouldn't be that you know that it's as an overdose prevention strategy. That's I don't think that's like a reason to do congregate shelters, but we'll leave that there. You know, just one last thing. You know, I mean, I could tell you, I've been working with a guy for the last couple of months at Ward's Island. This is a guy who has an income that actually puts him a little bit over, I think, qualifying for a city FEPS voucher to begin with. So he's making in the 30s. And he's been in the single adult shelter system at Ward's Island, at Clark Thomas, for 5 years. And so, you know, when we're talking about who's skewing that number, who's weighting that average, you know, it's not just people that have, like, the man is blind. Okay, he's blind. I mean, you know, he's making a decent, you know, it's not great, you know, he's making like, it's over 200% of the federal poverty line. And yet somehow, you know, I happened to like meet him and I was like, what's going on with you? And he's like, I've been here for 5 years. And we're trying to find something with HPD or something. It shouldn't be that a guy making $30-something thousand a year should be in shelter for 5 years. And that's just like, you know, pretty obvious.
I agree with you. I think households that are just above the income level for one subsidy but still not well off by New York City standards falls in my category of particularly challenging universe. But that is without getting into the specifics of the case, happy to work on that. individual
'cause
with you and agree.
Okay, so I'll let you guys go. Oh, sorry, I want to acknowledge Councilmember Gibson has joined us. And do any of my colleagues have any questions? Is anyone that wants to ask anything? Vanessa, do you have anything? Okay, Vanessa, do you have a question? No, all good. Okay. Okay. The last thing I'll leave you both with is I got 36 hours left to come up with language that we can age on 149 and 1642. And my expectation after our exchange is that we are going to work together over the next 36 hours to agree on language that that we can age. Is that correct?
Correct.
Can I get an affirmative? Okay.
And I will just say it's been a pleasure working with you. Thank you for your collaboration over the last couple of years.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And thank you, Deputy Commissioner Drinkwater as well, who I've known for longer than our working relationship here in the committee and in the administration. And it's been a great pleasure working with her as well. She's also, a neighbor in my neighborhood. So we'll be making sure. I imagine that we'll both be supporting the Safe Haven on Apollo Street on into the future. So I appreciate it, and thank you for all of your collaboration as well, Aaron. Thank you. Okay, I'll turn it back over to our moderator, Natalie Omari.
Thank you, Chair Levin. We have now concluded the administration's testimony and will turn to additional public testimony. First, I'd like to remind everyone that I will call up individuals in panels. Once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you, and you may begin your testimony once the Sergeant at Arms sets the clock and gives you the cue. All testimony will be limited to 3 minutes. Remember that there is a few second delay before we can hear you once you're unmuted, and please wait for the Sergeant at Arms to announce that you may begin before you start. Chair, I just want to acknowledge that we have some members from our first panel of public testimony who have their hands raised. If you would like to revisit some questions for them before we continue with our panels of public testimony. That's up to you.
Sure, that's fine with me. Yeah.
Okay. I believe in order of hands raised, we will go back to Sarah Wilson from our first panel.
Starting time.
Thank you so much. For the woman who was just speaking, I have 2 questions. One is about services and the other is about length of stay. They keep mentioning getting people off the street, quote unquote. I wanted to know if those numbers include people that have been housed, or does that include persons that have passed away, been sent to prison, or gone back to congregate shelter? I know that we're all familiar with the picture of Bellevue shelter when the street sweeps that you would mention at the end of the line rounded up a bunch of people and brought them over to Bellevue. They were forced to sleep in the lobby, on the floor, in the stairway, like a can of sardines. And I'm just wondering about those numbers, and also services. As a person who's dual diagnosed, both mental health and substance abuse, and is also disabled, I've been in 5 congregate shelters and never once have I ever been provided a service, but I have been prevented from attending my own based on location and curfew. So I'm curious to know what those services are. And then also in terms of length of stay, like I said, I'm dual diagnosed, highly functioning, but I am too poor for low income housing, but I was eligible for the 2010E and the city FEPS. I was forced to stay 740 consecutive days and nights, and I came in with paperwork in hand. Part of that reason is because you made people wait 4 months before you start their paperwork process. In those 4 months, that's $4,000 a month, that's $16,000 that was made with no work provided. During those 4 months, people go backwards in their mental health and their substance. They deteriorate in their effectiveness. So I just want to know, in regards to length of stay, persons like me who come in on a fixed income and need a fixed rent and have all their paperwork in hand, is there any way to waive that 4 months to start doing their paperwork? And then also you mentioned persons coming home from prison. Ex of mine just came home and he was given a benefit card, but it was not connected. Is there any way to not make those people wait 45 days to connect their benefits, and also send them home with a voucher so they can start their process as well, and not keep people in these congregate settings, which are ineffective, inhumane, and do not prevent overdose. As a person who is in recovery from active addiction, I wholeheartedly know that keeping me in a room with other active users and people who are selling substances does not prevent me from using. It actually forces me to be more distressed than I need to be. So those are my 2/3 questions. And I just want to know length of stay. Can we fix it for the people coming in on fixed incomes? Can we get rid of that 4-month waiting period? People coming home from prison, and then what are these specific services everyone keeps talking about, because I've never seen them, and if we're rounding people up and offering them services, we need to give them an accurate description of what's going on. So I hope I made some sense, and thank you so much.
No, Tara, I appreciate that. I think unfortunately there's just in terms of the hearing process, we can't have like a witnesses asking other witnesses questions, but those are all, those are all important things that we can follow up, I think, in writing to the administration to get answers on those questions. Great.
I believe the other members of the public who had questions were. Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Okay, so we're going to proceed with our original list of public panelists, and if there are members of the public who have their hands raised at this time and would like to ask additional questions or make additional testimony later, we will get back to them. But for now, we need to proceed with the additional members of the public who had previously signed on to testify. So in order, we will go in order of public panels, and for now we will proceed with the group from Human.NYC, which in order will be Ashley Belcher, Charmel Lucas, and Karim Walker. So again, wait for the sergeant to prompt you, and Ashley Walker, you may begin your testimony once the sergeant prompts you.
Starting time.
Good afternoon, and thank you to Councilmember Levin and members of the General Welfare Committee. My name is Ashley Belcher, and I'm an outreach worker with Human.NYC, a grassroots advocacy organization focused on street and subway homelessness. Today, I would like to discuss concerns with the way homeless outreach is conducted and my recommendations for improvement. In my personal experience, I know that homeless outreach teams do not provide enough information and intimidate people when they come with police. First, most of the time, they do not tell you their names, let alone have a badge on to let you know they're indeed an outreach worker. Also, homeless outreach teams such as BRC come with a police officer and talk to people and ask them if they want to go to a shelter or if they need a stabilization bed. When I was homeless myself, I did not appreciate this approach with the police. They made me very uneasy and I wanted to run away. I also never was told about the voucher process while I was on the ground like I was later on when I met a woman named Helen Strom from Safety Net Project. Now, during my time as an outreach worker with Human.NYC, I've seen my experience shared still by those on the street, specifically people that I have spoken to, including people that I've known since I was in that position and are still currently homeless. People have told me that it's not getting any better, it's only getting worse. People are telling me that they barely see any outreach teams, and if they do see outreach teams, they are really no help to them whatsoever. One issue is that these homeless folks have no way to get in touch with people they just met to help them. Yes, they can call 311 off the Link NYC kiosk, but that's not the same person that they just met with and saw who asked them if they wanted help. I believe there should be some type of way for homeless people to reach out to outreach teams on a personal level so that they can get help if they want and need it. In addition, almost every time I go to work, I see a street sweep notice, and not just one notice, at least 3 or 4. I have also seen how the city and businesses are specifically making it more uncomfortable for unsheltered homeless individuals. They've taken out a lot of benches in the subway. People living outside can't use bathrooms in most of the areas because of the pandemic, and they have nowhere to get food at night. I believe the outreach team should bring people food and water when they go to wake them. As someone who used to be outside for years, I find it very discouraging, and I know what it feels like to have people who are asking, do you need help, and have nothing to offer them. I know how it feels being woken up and you're about to be prosecuted because there's a police officer by the outreach team. It's unbearable for someone who is institutionalized. There has to be a better solution. Mayor de Blasio and Commissioner Banks fell short of delivering what homeless New Yorkers—
Time expired.
Yep. Sorry. That's it.
You could go ahead and finish. Actually, it's okay.
Okay. Okay, our team hopes that the next administration can do better by our homeless neighbors. Specifically, we're calling the next administration to ensure that outreach teams provide basic needs items to street homeless individuals. I ask outreach teams, please start bringing backpacks or food before you wake up a homeless person outside, or in the area, or on a train, or in the station. And please state your name as an outreach worker. I feel like you may be able to assist them with something they need done. Making one-on-one relationships with the person may be a better job instead of making it seem like nobody wants to do this position. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ashley. And thank you for your work and your testimony.
Thank you for your testimony, Ashley. We will now hear from Charmel Lucas.
Starting time.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Council Member Levin and the members of the General Welfare Committee. My name is Charmel Lucas. I'm an outreach and organized specialist with Human NYC, a grassroots advocacy organization focused on street and subway homelessness. Today, I would like to discuss the intersection of health, mental health, and housing. Without a home, there is no way of healing. I speak from my personal experience being a homeless organizer and speak with street homeless individuals for 7 years. And from my current position with Human NYC, a main concern of mine is people's health. Homelessness is a huge impact on health, especially street homeless. One main issue related to this are the street sweeps. Okay, the street sweeps are throwing away. They're throwing away street homeless people's belongings, including things like medication. People living unsheltered have many types of medical conditions, including cancer, diabetes, and gangrene. Others take medication for their mental health. The way I see it, that New York City Department of Homeless Services is adding to sickness, poor mental health, and death when they continue to sweep people and throw away their belongings. Many people on the street tells us that they're offered shelter but not housing. When they talk to the outreach teams, understandably, they do not want to go to shelters, especially during the ongoing pandemic. The solution we really need is permanent housing. That is what people willing to, that is what help with people's health, These shortcomings of DHS not putting up help in place are not new. This mess has been going on for years. So many organizations have come up with ideas and solutions just to be ignored. We speak to the people, we know them, we give them our names. People living unsheltered trust us. We have a relationship with them. Which based on our conversations with people does not happen with DHS contracted outreach teams. A huge mistrust is a big problem. That would DHS say, a huge of the trust problems is what DHS says is different from what NYPD say. Why do outreach workers tell people to stay in the same spot, but the police make them move? Here again, they're not getting the help they need. When outreach workers come with nothing, no food, no blankets, no names, cards with numbers on it that no one answers, then the NYPD and sanitation.
Just finish that sentence and you're good.
You could keep on going.
Thank you. The NYPD and sanitation come with sweeps, throw away people's phones away. That means no communication. Our teams hope that the next administration can do better by our homeless neighbors. Specifically, we're calling for the next administration to do the following: First, stop sweeping people's belongings. Their health and well-being depends on it. Second, hire people that were formerly homeless that have the experience to understand the situation. Last, make sure your outreach workers provide to people they talk to. I would like to see including dates, time, outreach organization individuals that will provide information, including the date, the time, outreach workers' name, location, and they should be expecting outreach teams to expect the outreach team to come back. Outreach teams could give 800 numbers for those that don't have phones because of sweeps. And last but not least, the next administration to assure that all people have access to permanent housing and important steps to create better health. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharmel.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Sharmel. We will now hear from Karim Walker. Karim, you may begin when the sergeant prompts you.
Sorry, starting time.
Good afternoon, Councilman Levin and members of the General Welfare Committee. My name is Karim Walker, and I'm an outreach and organizing specialist with Human.NYC, an advocacy group for street and subway homeless New Yorkers. In addition, I'm also a formerly homeless New York resident. I want to talk about the impact street sweeps have had on the homelessness. At best, the sweeps are a misguided attempt and a waste of resources by the city as a mere bandage on the much bigger wound that is homelessness in New York City. They shift the blame of being unhoused from the city to the individuals, a move that adds insult to injury. The sweeps, often last minute and not often well coordinated, shatter the trust between homeless New Yorkers and the homeless outreach organizations that people may need working to secure housing for them. Excuse me. In addition, the sweeps end up destroying vital resources that many homeless people may depend on, such as medication, identification, and in some cases, feminine hygiene products, which may be difficult, if not impossible, to replace. It's no secret that the sweeps, which are coordinated by DSNY as well as the NYPD, have been ordered by the mayor's office. But a late November encounter with an outreach worker from DHS at Tompkins Square Park confirmed this directly to me. This is especially troubling as Mayor de Blasio had 8 years to address the problem and refused to do so in any meaningful fashion. During my time in homeless outreach and organization with Human.NYC, it has become increasingly clear that a lot of homeless people feel the same way that I do regarding the sweeps. A recent encounter with a homeless resident at Tompkins Square Park named Tony, who has had items seized in prior sweeps, including his birth certificate, confirmed the callous and dehumanizing nature of these sweeps and the lack of efficacy in them. Sweeps are not designed to provide outreach. They are designed to break spirits and bend wills. In addition, about a month ago, there was a sweep at Tompkins Square Park, which saw several tents get swept up, and one that was participated by both DSNY as well as the NYPD. We see these notices every time we come out there. So it's not a one-off. It's seldom a one-off. Mayor de Blasio and Commissioner Banks fell far short delivering what homeless New Yorkers want and need to live wholesome, productive, and healthy lives. From underfunding housing vouchers and allowing people leaving the shelter system to enter substandard housing of questionable legality, which are topics best saved for other hearings, to harassing homeless New Yorkers and pretending they don't exist, the current administration has shown that it was never serious about looking after the most dispossessed and disempowered of us. The Street Sweep program was nothing more than an effort to get the homeless out of sight as the city attempts to recover from a pandemic rivaled by that only by HIV. Our team hopes the incoming Adams administration can and will do better by our homeless residents and neighbors. In particular, we are calling on it to do the following: end the Street Sweeps program and institute a more humane approach that addresses street and subway homelessness on the terms of the homeless and not on the terms of the homeless service providers. Ensure homeless New Yorkers are eligible for fully and adequately funded housing vouchers and have supporting housing options available for all who need it. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much, Kareem. Natalie, is this the entire panel?
Yes, this is our first panel.
Thank you so much to this panel. I just want to thank you all. And in particular, just I want to thank Human.NYC for your, really incredible advocacy over the years. It's been a very meaningful partnership for me to work with you all. I can tell you that a few years ago, I even made sure to try to get a meeting with Human.NYC and DHS leadership around the issue of reducing the barriers to getting into safe havens, and reducing that requirement for meeting a somewhat arbitrary chronically homeless definition. And I think that largely through your advocacy, I think we've made progress there, and you've I think greatly impacted the discourse in positive ways, and I just want to offer my appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Levin. I'd now like to remind any council members who may like to ask questions of this panel to use the raise hand function in Zoom to indicate that they have a question.
We've also been joined by Councilmember Grodenchik.
Any council members who'd like to ask a question? Okay. Seeing none, we will proceed with our public testimony. The next panel in order of speaking will be Ibrahim Ayu, Leslie Armstrong, Amy Bloomsack, and Felipe Vargas. Ibrahim Ayu, you may begin once you are prompted by the sergeant.
Starting time.
Greetings, everybody. I just want to make clear that this is Selena Trow from Vocal New York. Unfortunately, Ibrahim Ayu, our vocal leader, does not have the luxury of consistent internet access in his shelter facility. So I have jumped in to read his testimony on his behalf. So please excuse any background noise. I will begin. Dear New York City Council, I am a current New York City resident who doesn't live in permanent housing. In my former career, I was a licensed attorney in the city's court system until mental illness caused me to have severe breakdown, which led approximately to a year-long bid in jail. Upon my release from incarceration, I found myself without a place to live, so I entered the shelter system in Brooklyn, where I am today. The conditions for people, particularly men in the Renaissance shelter, is deplorable. The typical person participating in this meeting will not let their relatives or anyone they love in this shelter. The smell of K2 synthetic marijuana is overpowering the hallways and bathrooms because there are no real services within the shelters for those who are suffering through opioid addictions and dependencies. The bathrooms are not cleaned and are in third world conditions. And the worst part of it all, people employed to help you through this challenging period of homelessness are usually not helpful at all. And we are often treated with disdain and disrespect. Often the police are called for trivial matters to instill fear in you if you dare challenge their authority. Many of us are in shelter are due to return to incarceration. To avoid this inhumane treatment, I have slept on the subways at various drop-in centers and even in emergency rooms and hospitals like Kings County and Wyckoff due to my mental health issues, as well as my diagnosed hypertension and diabetes. Needless to say, it is extremely traumatic to be a homeless single adult in this city. That is a summary of the bad side. However, you have a chance to make it right. Pass homeless shelter and outreach reform and put yourself and your family members in our shoes and legislate accordingly. How you do this by providing access to much needed housing vouchers. And then once that has been accomplished, make incentives so that people with these vouchers are not discriminated against in their housing search. I know few people who have had housing vouchers for months, but cannot leave the shelter because no one will rent to them. This has to end now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We will now turn to Leslie Armstrong.
Starting time.
Good afternoon. My name is Leslie Armstrong, and I'm the Assistant Vice President for NYC Emergency Housing and Shelter Services and Volunteers of America, Greater New York, the local affiliate of the National Organization Volunteers of America, Inc., VOA. I would like to thank the Chair of the City Council Committee on General Welfare, Stephen Levin, for the opportunity to submit my testimony. VOA Greater New York is an anti-poverty organization that aims to end homelessness in the Greater New York area by 2050. As one of the largest providers of services to families and individuals experiencing homelessness in the Greater New York area, we deliver services to more than 11,000 adults and children annually through 66 programs in New York City, Northern New Jersey, and Westchester. We specialize in providing housing and services to seniors, veterans, survivors of domestic violence, persons living with HIV and AIDS, and persons with behavioral health and substance abuse disorders. VOA GNY has provided housing for single adults since 1984. We now operate 4 such shelters providing transitional housing services to 556 individuals daily. Fiscal year 2021, VOA single adult shelters served a total of 5,079 individuals. Many of our sites are owned by the City of New York and receive funding from New York City Department of Homeless Services, for which we are very grateful. VOA operates approximately 9 single room occupancy programs in New York City, funded by the Department of Homeless Services and the Department of Mental Health and Hygiene. Each of our SRO programs provide permanent and affordable housing to residents with on-site services such as case management, daily living skills training, addiction support, counseling, and recreation. Residents pay rent, hold leases, and are afforded the same rights as any other tenant of other residential buildings. The goal of our programs for single adults is to stabilize them and prevent them from returning to homelessness. On-site services are designed to help improve independent living skills, physical and behavioral health outcomes. For those who wish to become more independent or require a higher level of care, case managers can assist them with relocation. COVID has intensified client needs for housing and other services while creating obstacles to meeting them that can only be met with additional resources, including additional hours from highly qualified staff. Our rigorous adherence to health and safety protocol has doubled the work that goes into virtually every aspect of our onboarding process and programming. Worse yet, the slowdowns in every aspect of getting homeless single adults to shelter means that our clients continue living in rougher conditions for longer and then arrive needing far more care than we estimated or planned for. VOA GNY has met these exigencies, which mandate more staff-intensive interventions with increased services, but the same or fewer number of staff, even as our staff has dealt with health concerns and childcare issues of their own. We appreciate the legislative and financial support we receive from the City of New York, and we're going to continue to need it going forward. On behalf of VOA Greater New York, I would like to thank the Chair of the City Council Committee on General Welfare, Stephen Levin, for providing us with a platform to discuss the needs of single adults and shelters. We are grateful for your leadership and look forward to continuing partnering with the City Council as we work together to end homelessness in New York City. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Armstrong. Thank you for the good work you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie, for your testimony. I just want to remind everyone that written testimony can be submitted up to 72 hours at the conclusion of this hearing to testimony@council.nyc.gov for any additional comments that you have, and all of that testimony will be reviewed in full by committee staff. We will now turn to Amy Bloomsack. Amy, you may begin once prompted by the sergeant.
Starting time.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Amy Bloomsack. I represent Neighbors Together. We are a community-based organization. We do hot meals, individual stabilizing services, and we organize homeless New Yorkers who are fighting for solutions to the problems they experience daily. I work with homeless New Yorkers in the Community Action Program, and we have been fighting for change for a long time. And I'm very grateful to you, Councilmember Levin, and to the committee for holding this hearing today on this really critical issue. Excuse the background noise. I also want to thank your staff and the committee staff for all of your hard work over the years. And I really want to thank all of the homeless individuals who have been fighting tirelessly despite unending trauma and really, really like unbelievably difficult daily experiences. So thank you for the resiliency and perseverance. Quickly before I get into my testimony, I want to say something really struck me about what First Deputy Commissioner Park said. And she said something like, we're the only locality that has a mandate or like requires the right to shelter. And that's great. And it's important, it's critical, and it's obviously extremely hard work. And I think like that's not enough to excuse that we can do better and should do better. We need to be continually setting the bar higher. And just because other people aren't doing it doesn't mean that we can say we're doing enough. And I think that we need to remember that and hold that first and foremost. So I think everyone here knows that homelessness and housing were a major crisis before COVID hit, and COVID really laid bare and exposed those massive problems that people who are already in the system had known about for many, many years. And I really want to highlight that this has been an incredibly difficult year and a half, 2 years for people who are homeless. There has been an incredible amount of violence and trauma, more than the baseline amount for people who are in the homelessness system. COVID, being suddenly forced back from the de-densification hotels, back to congregate shelters with a really disorganized, stressful process, massive police sweeps and targeting of homeless New Yorkers, harassment. As many other directly impacted people said, the transfers, having not enough notice, being far flung, losing all of your things, having your stuff in storage thrown away with no notice. It's very hard. And so I think that we can do better, and we should do better. And I'm calling on DHS and the future administration to work to the best of their ability to do that. I think despite our really incredible wins with city FEPs this year, there are still some remaining problems. The initial eligibility is challenging, right? For our members who are at 200% of the federal poverty level, which is the eligibility criteria. If they want to get a part-time job or start working, then they lose their ability to get a city FEPS voucher.
I'm expired.
You can go ahead and finish, Amy.
And so we need to make sure that people can get the voucher and then hold on to it without penalizing them for wanting to improve their lives. And I'm glad that the income cliff was addressed, but we need that threshold for entry to be larger. And so people with a shopping ladder should also be allowed to increase their income. I just want to quickly say that we need to pass some other really critical bills to address the holistic system of homelessness. We need to pass Intro 2047, the Fair Chance for Housing Act, right? People need to be able to get into housing and avoid discrimination. We need to pass supportive housing bills, Intro 147 and 2176. And we also need to make sure that we have a holistic way of addressing the homelessness and housing crisis, including addressing source of income discrimination, building more affordable housing for very low income New Yorkers, and also that the city and the incoming administration really needs to be doing advocacy at the state level for a lot of policies there, which will help people who are homeless in New York City, like the Housing Access Voucher Program, more funding for the Housing Our Neighbors with Dignity Act, supporting the Good Cause Eviction Bill, and passing the council resolution in support of good cause eviction, ending 421A, and increasing state FEPs. So I thank you for your time and attention. I'll include more detail in my written testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And I just want to express my appreciation for all the partnership with Neighbors Together, which has been incredibly important to the work of this committee. I appreciate everything you do.
Thank you, Amy, for your testimony. We will now turn to Felipe Vargas. Felipe, you may begin when prompted by the sergeant.
Starting time.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Felipe Vargas, and I'm VP of Programs at the Dole Fund. Our program, Ready, Willing, and Able, has extended far beyond just addressing homelessness. Our evidence-based, cost-effective, replicable model reduces recidivism by 62%, advances racial and economic justice, improves public safety, and creates jobs through social enterprise, paying more than $8 million directly into the pockets of our program trainees who are formerly homeless, and alleviates poverty by supporting workforce and economic development. As New York City recovers, the Dole Fund and Ready, Willing, and Able should be seen as a resource and a partner. There are two immediate ways that we add value. First, by linking people experiencing homelessness to mainstream employment, and two, by linking low-income New Yorkers to housing through creative housing models. The City of New York understands that the homeless population is not a monolith. It is our belief that the shelter system achieves the highest outcomes when providers are able to provide the service in which they have a particular competency to populations they know will benefit from them. In the case of the Dole Fund, we add value in 2 ways. First, work. RWA is a conduit between people experiencing homelessness and re-entering post-incarceration. We connect them with jobs. We are a stepping stone between prison cells and park benches to jobs, dignity, and a better future. Our core commitment is to provide a first job with immediate pay in our community improvement project. You've seen them in the community, I'm sure, as the Men in Blue. We have other social enterprises as well. We invest in human potential and we achieve market-based results. This July, we were selected by the mayor's office to play a key role as a founding member of the City Cleanup Corps, an ambitious effort to create 10,000 jobs for New Yorkers while beautifying the city. Our unique experience with supplemental sanitation, graffiti removal, and deployment of crews citywide has been integral to realizing the goals of the program. We were able to offer our program to people residing at other nonprofit shelters. To date, we have been able to transition and employ 243 people through the program. With industries emerging such as green jobs, trades in desperate need of new talent such as carpentry and welding, and the recent recognition of the role that economic justice plays in achieving racial justice, we at the Dole Fund are expanding our portfolio of job opportunities. We seek to partner with New York City and the next administration, not only to bring our transitional employment programs to neighborhoods throughout the 5 boroughs, but to develop training for more skill-based jobs. Because of the population we serve, working people, most who are not eligible for housing vouchers or permanent supportive housing, we are actively working with landlords to master lease vacant units in previously occupied properties and hotels to provide housing for this population. The Dole Fund is seeking to expand eligibility of city.
You can go ahead and finish, Mr. Vargas.
City FEP vouchers and leverage the HRA Master Lease program, which relies on City FEP's funding to convert vacant hotels into housing. We believe this effort to create deeply affordable housing in former hotels for low-income working people who reside in shelters will demonstrate mutually beneficial outcomes for people experiencing homelessness and the city overall. In 2015, it took an average of 56 days, 8 weeks, for one of our residents with a mainstream job to find permanent housing. Currently, housing search time has increased threefold to 175 days, almost 6 months. This is due to the dwindling number of units affordable to low-income working people, as well as the decreased eligibility of low-income working people to qualify for subsidies. Shelter stays for employed residents have increased from 56 days in 2015 to 175 days in 2001. If we could reduce each stay by 119 days to what it was back to in 2015, then we would save approximately $11,305 in emergency shelter costs for each single shelter resident who could move to permanent housing more expeditiously. If at any given time an estimated 95 residents in one of our shelters have jobs and only 30% of them currently qualify for housing rental assistance, city FEPs, then all efforts should be made to increase this figure to 100%. Qualifying these individuals for assistance will lead to a significant aggregate reduction in bed stays and costs. This, of course, could be applied across the New York City shelter system for even more impact. Thank you for giving the Dole Fund the chance to weigh in on these critical issues. Look to us as a partner and a resource as New York City pursues recovery that includes all of its citizens. This is going to take work, and that is what our organization is about, working together with the city to solve homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you to Felipe and this entire panel for your testimony. I just want to remind any council members who would like to ask a question to please use the raise hand function in Zoom and to please keep your questions to 5 minutes. Okay, seeing none, we will move to our next public panel. In order of speaking, we will have Ellen Strom, Deborah Berkman, Eric Lee, and Jacqueline Simone. Helen, you may begin your testimony once prompted by the sergeant.
Starting time.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Helen Strom, and I work at the Safety Net Project at the Urban Justice Center. Thanks so much for the opportunity to testify today. And thanks for holding this hearing and to everyone who spoke out earlier, especially everyone with experience with homelessness, to talk about what is going on in homelessness in New York City. So wanted to speak on a few things. There's a lot to talk about here, but would like to highlight some of the humanity, the indifference, the cruelty, and the violence that we see on a regular basis that homeless people endure and have endured during this administration, and offer a few recommendations on what could be changed as this administration wraps up and we look to a new one. First off, I want to speak about sweeps. So under this administration, we watched as New York City transformed its DHS outreach teams, which continue to be chronically under-resourced in terms of being able to provide actual assistance with housing, into a piece of the broken window strategy of policing. So the sheer quantity of sweeps of homeless New Yorkers should shock all of our consciences. The Department of Social Services coordinated more than 6,000 sweeps over the past 5 years. None of those helped people on the street get housed, even though virtually everyone agrees that there's a crisis of street homelessness in New York City. In fact, the sweeps did the opposite, resulting in the destruction of people's possessions, their paperwork, and destroying any possibility of a positive relationship between people who are homeless and homeless outreach. Through the implementation of these policies, we would say that this administration, in fact, has overseen one of the most systematic efforts to disappear homeless people from the street in the history of modern homelessness. So our recommendation for the next administration, seeing as this one seems to have no intention of changing course, is to immediately stop all sweeps of homeless people and focus all efforts on offering immediate assistance and permanent housing to people who are on the streets. Would also like to speak briefly about the shelter system. The use of hotels during COVID, I think, just reinforced what homeless people have been saying for decades. And I think we all know at some basic level that congregate shelters are not a dignified place for people to live, and that people need privacy.
Sorry, Helen, can you hold on 1 second? Oh, never mind.
Okay.
He's on mute now. Okay.
Sure. And decent living conditions. So we call on the next administration to move away from the congregate shelter model, instead focus on dignified private rooms, quick access to permanent housing. This summer, we watched as people's belongings were thrown onto the street, as people returned to the street after over a year of stability in hotels, and we watched people endure intense violence and trauma at the hands of the city of New York. It was a huge mistake to end the hotel program, and we call on the next administration to immediately reverse that. Finally, just want to touch on,
expired.
I guess, just the last two things.
You could go ahead and finish, Helen.
Yeah, I guess just a couple of things before we finish. There's a couple of things before this administration finishes up that they can do to use the housing resources that they literally have in their hands right now that would make a tremendous difference. One is processing of city PEPS vouchers. We have seen ridiculous bureaucratic delays for people who have actually managed to find apartments, who then lose them because the city cannot process their paperwork fast enough and the shelters are not processing their paperwork fast enough. We call on the city to immediately invest resources into processing people's vouchers as quickly as possible. It's ridiculous that, like, someone who has found an apartment and signed a lease is losing apartments because the city of New York can't bureaucratically process their paperwork. So that's number one. Number two, just calling the city to expedite the issuance of all of the emergency housing Section 8 vouchers. When I checked this morning, only 820 of the 5,738 vouchers that are supposed to go to homeless New Yorkers had actually made it to them, and the city has had these vouchers for 6 months now. That is like completely unexcusable in the midst of our homelessness crisis.
Helen, can you repeat that number?
821 out of the 5,738 Section 8 vouchers that we received from the federal government have actually been distributed. That's completely unacceptable when we got these vouchers 6 months ago and people are in really unsafe living conditions in congregate shelters on the street, as we all know.
Where did you get that data from?
The HUD's website.
Okay.
On the EHV distribution.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for.
And yeah, I'll finish there.
Oh, no. You could finish your testimony. It's fine.
That was the last point, that like one thing this administration could do before it leaves is make sure that the housing resources that they have in their control right now, that people are actually able to use them.
the other
Yeah.
4,200 vouchers that they have.
Yeah, I think like it's been 6 months already that if 4,000 people who are homeless in the city got their vouchers before the new year, before the holidays, that would make a significant difference. And it should not be this difficult to get Section 8 vouchers in people's hands when they're paid for by the federal government.
Okay. Thank you, Helen. Thank you. And thank you so much for all of your partnership over the years. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Helen, for your testimony. We will now hear from Deborah Berkman. Deborah, you may begin once prompted by the sergeant.
Starting time.
Chair Levin, council members and staff, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Deborah Berkman, and I'm the coordinating attorney of the Shelter Advocacy Initiative at the New York Legal Assistance Group, or NYLAG. Most of the clients that I serve are single adults experiencing either street or sheltered homelessness. And most of my clients who are experiencing street homelessness have stayed in the DHS congregate adult shelters, but they haven't been able to remain there due to assault and trauma they endured by other residents while staying there. Quite simply, they are too scared to go back. There are other barriers to my clients remaining in single adult shelter, and those include clients losing their bed due to missing curfew, clients being prohibited from bringing outside food into the shelter, the intense policing of shelter, and the aggression that shelter and staff and security display towards my clients. In fact, many of my clients have reported to me that they've been beaten by DHS police. And even purportedly accessible shelters are in fact inaccessible for clients with disabilities. Clients who use wheelchairs or other assistive devices often report broken elevators and facilities that are impossible to navigate in a wheelchair. And clients with mental health disabilities report that they're rarely, if ever, accommodated. Thus, many of my clients are forced into street homelessness. While sleeping outside, my clients are regularly robbed, assaulted, and raped. One of my clients witnessed one of the other men he slept outside with have lighter fluid poured on his foot and set on fire. My clients are woken and harassed by police officers, and they're often arrested for trespass and other trivial offenses that essentially criminalize homelessness. They are food insecure, they are malnourished, they're in chronic pain because they sleep on the ground, they suffer from skin conditions based on their exposure to the elements. And if these clients didn't suffer from mental illness prior to becoming street homeless, the trauma of sleeping outside and being constantly on alert has caused most of them to have severe anxiety. No one would choose this life if they were offered a safe alternative. And 99% of my clients who are experiencing street homelessness would come inside if they were offered a safe haven or a stabilization placement. But DHS has erected many barriers to entry into the safe haven system. And most clients describe getting a safe haven placement as an impossible feat. And we presume this is because of limited capacity. DHS must significantly increase safe haven and stabilization bed capacity to meet the needs of those experiencing street homelessness. Another major barrier to my clients coming inside are the intake procedures to enter DHS shelter. Intake can take up to 2 days, with most of that time spent waiting in crowded waiting rooms. Clients are told if they leave even briefly at any point between the multiple appointments, they'll need to start the process over. Often my clients aren't fed and they're not able to take their essential medications. Clients often report staff at intake centers that are verbally abusive and demeaning towards shelter applicants. Clients with disabilities are often not accommodated, particularly those with mental health disabilities. And many of my clients report that DHS police at intake centers specifically are physically aggressive. So I have clients experiencing street homelessness who would be willing to go into shelter, but cannot get through the intake process. And to cure this, we need to make sure that
You can go ahead and finish.
Thank you. To cure this, we want to make sure that every member of DHS intake staff treats every intake applicant with respect. To that end, all intake staff should be trained in trauma-informed practices and de-escalation. And to ensure clients don't have to wait for hours in the intake centers, the client should have timed appointments that allow them to leave the center if necessary. Clients who self-identify as having disabilities should always be awarded immediate provisional accommodations, even if they don't have the requisite medical documentation, so that they can actually get through the intake process. Clients should be offered food and drink when they have to stay in the intake centers for a long period of time. Finally, the telephone intake that Ms. Park talked about earlier must be offered. A couple of additional recommendations for the adult shelter system include that transfers between shelters should be permitted when a client can't stay in one shelter. DHS should make it easier to re-enter shelter once a client has been away. Animal companions must be allowed in shelter, and DHS should not transfer clients without cause. We thank the Committee on General Welfare for the work it has done, and particularly want to thank Chair Levin for all the work you've done over the last 8 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you for your testimony, Deborah. We will now go to Eric Lee. Eric, you can begin when prompted by the sergeant.
Starting time.
Hi, good morning. My name is Eric Lee. I'm Director of Policy and Planning for Homeless Services United. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. HSU is grateful to Chair Levin, Speaker Johnson, and members of the General Welfare Committee for your steadfast leadership on behalf of New Yorkers experiencing homelessness and housing instability. Thank you for your leadership passing Intro 146 to raise City FEP's rent levels. It is nothing short of monumental. Thank you also for approving intros 148 and 2405 to make time spent in foster care and runaway and homeless youth programs count towards City FEP's eligibility. And we hope the mayor will quickly sign them into law. With the passage of these bills, there's still more work to be done to ensure City FEPs can be used as well as possible. This includes, as mentioned, the need for the application and lease-up process to only take 1 month, given that there's no longer signing bonuses for landlords. So they will be losing money and less interested. The next administration should also consider changing initial eligibility income from 200% federal poverty limit to 50% AMI in line with Section 8. We also would like to see the removal of the lawsuit requirement and shelter history eligibility requirement for in-community City FEPs. Providers are focusing on helping households apply for over 8,000 emergency housing vouchers. As Helen noted, far too few leases have actually been signed. As far as I know, it was 83 in 6 months. And this is due to underinvestment in the administration of the vouchers and lack of communication with the providers helping people apply for them. We've made the following recommendations to the current and incoming administration to expedite hiring of NYCHA staff to process the EHV applications. NYCHA must give providers real-time live support as they're trying to help people apply. Providers need a flowchart and timeline for the turnaround process for the application to understand what's the entire overall process. To eliminate duplicate documentation requests in the application, and the city should also ask for HUD waivers for upfront income verification and unit inspections. NYCHA staff should keep providers in the loop on applications all the way through the process up to lease up. And monthly meetings should be held with the continuum of care as well as coalition provider coalitions to be able to flag and identify things and disperse information to providers. With the closure of ERAP, we ask that the council join us in asking Governor Hochul and OTDA to remove the recoupment requirement for one-shot deals from state statute, as well as urging the governor to sign A 8009 S 6573 into law, which would raise the rental rates for state FEPs.
You could go ahead and finish, Eric.
Oh, thank you. HSU is grateful for the administration's investments to expand stabilization and safe haven bed capacity for street homeless individuals, for increased funding for street medicine for DHS outreach providers, which will expand access to doctors as well as medically assisted treatment for opioid addiction. We're extremely proud of New York City for opening the first 2 official safe consumption sites in the nation. To your question earlier, Chair Levin, around overdose deaths, the latest CDC report showed over 20% increase in the last year from April 2020 to 2021 in New York City. And that's an underreporting because they don't have the full data yet for those months.
That's for people in shelter or people or overall
citywide.
Citywide.
It's just overdose deaths in general. It's just showing the greater need for medically assisted treatment and other options to try to get people off of opioids, as well as how safe injection sites can help immediately lower deaths. Public and private hospital emergency departments must stop refusing to admit street homeless individuals that are suffering acute psychiatric episodes. The city should fund hospitals to provide more psych beds to be able to meet that need. Hospitals should also call DHS outreach when street homeless individuals are being treated in the ER. The city should consider funding providers to embed staff in health and hospital emergency rooms to immediately meet with clients there, as was done through DSRIP funding. The Department of Health should expand the intensive mobile treatment teams to expand capacity. We'd also like to see additional medical respite beds for individuals that are bouncing between the street and ERs because they're too sick to enter shelter, but not sick enough for long-term hospitalization. With regards to street sweeps, which we've heard a lot on this morning, they should never be used as punitive measures. DHS, DSNY, and NYPD must prioritize the needs of the affected street homeless individuals, and they should only be held after multiple thoughtful engagements by DHS outreach providers. DSNY and NYPD must allow people to take their belongings, and DSS must help with paying for storage as needed. DHS outreach providers would like to see DHS create a formalized process to directly place clients in shelter, given the things we've heard about challenges trying to get through the intake process. We applaud the council for passage of Intro 150 to create a multi-agency transportation task force for students in temporary housing. We'd like to see this collaborative thinking being carried forward to address the homeless crisis large scale, including aligning the city's affordable housing and homeless plans, cross-honoring time with different systems for eligibility for rental assistance, improving healthcare integration with DHS programs. As First Deputy Park testified, we need to stem the flow of feeder systems into DHS, including the New York State Department of Community Corrections. With regards to shelters, the council and the next administration must push back against NIMBYism to allow DHS to site and create new shelters as needed for populations that need them. That includes expanding shelter services for the aging shelter population and creating expanded access to specialized shelters for young people aging out of RHY shelters, as well as members of the LGBTQI community. And finally, we would like to see comprehensive contract reform, not just for homeless shelter services, but for all human service contracts, including creating a comprehensive wage schedule and wage ladder for nonprofit funded government staff or nonprofit government funded staff, as well as lifting the cap on fringe costs. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, Chair Levin, for the 8 years of leadership you've done helping homeless New Yorkers.
Thank you, Eric. Obviously, I can tell you that, when I first took over as chair, my predecessor's chief of staff told me, first people you have to sit down with are Homeless Services United to understand all of the issues that all the challenges that we as a city are facing. And I think that your testimony just now, illustrated why that was the case, which is that HSU provides a really comprehensive perspective and has, consistently put forward policy recommendations that are very helpful, are very needed and very necessary, and you do so in a very consistent, thoughtful way. And so, I hope. I noticed that your executive director, Catherine Trapani, is on the transition organization for the incoming administration. I'm hopeful that your testimony that you just read is going directly into the hands of the incoming mayor and his administration, so that they know the issues that that they can start to get working on right away. So greatly appreciate it, and I greatly appreciate the partnership all along. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, for your testimony. We will now go to Jacqueline Simone. Jacqueline, you may begin when prompted by the sergeant.
Starting time.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and thank you to the people with lived experience who have shared their powerful words today. My name is Jacqueline Simone. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the policy director at the Coalition for the Homeless. I've submitted longer joint testimony with the Legal Aid Society, but I wanted to highlight a few areas today. New York continues to see near record levels of single adult homelessness. There are more than 18,000 single adults sleeping in DHS shelters each night, a staggering 97% more than a decade ago.
Due to systemic racism, people of color are overrepresented among the homeless. 86% of single adults in DHS shelters are Black or Latinx. And thousands of additional homeless adults reside in shelters overseen by other agencies. They bed down on the streets or they're doubled up or couch surfing. As the independent monitor of the DHS shelter system, coalition staff regularly observe and hear reports of issues in shelters ranging from inadequate maintenance and extreme temperatures to complaints about the quality and quantity of food and conflicts with security staff. The pandemic exacerbated many of these issues, bringing staffing challenges and the threat of contracting an airborne virus in congregate dorms. DHS moved thousands of single adults out of congregate facilities and into hotel rooms in 2020 to better protect them from the virus, but Mayor de Blasio prematurely decided to return the majority of single adults to congregate shelters this summer. Despite litigation and continued advocacy, the mass shelter transfers over the summer were traumatic and disruptive for homeless single adults, some of whom have left the shelter system entirely and now reside on the streets. The city should redesign the shelter system to reduce the reliance on large congregate facilities and shift the creation of new capacity towards single occupancy accommodations with full accessibility features for those with disabilities, as well as smaller, low threshold shelters such as safe havens. In addition to the adults in shelters, thousands of others bed down in the streets, subway systems, and other public places. Unfortunately, rather than adopting a harm reduction approach, Mayor de Blasio directed his agencies to dramatically increase street sweeps, ignoring CDC guidance during the pandemic. The city must cease all activities that criminalize unsheltered homelessness while meeting the immediate needs of homeless New Yorkers and providing them with access to stable, permanent, affordable, and supportive housing options. Housing is the answer to homelessness, and we applaud the City Council for taking bold action this year to raise the value of City PEPS vouchers and to expand eligibility. We urge the Council to build upon this progress by passing 3 pieces of pending legislation: Intro 2047, Intro 147, and Intro 2176. The Fair Chance for Housing Act, Intro 2047, would help thousands of New Yorkers, including many who are homeless, access stable housing by prohibiting housing discrimination based on conviction history. Intro 147 would identify barriers to accessing supportive housing, and Intro 2176 would equip tenants.
You go ahead and finish, Jackie. Yeah, of course, yeah.
I'm almost done, I swear.
Of course. No, please.
Intro 2176 would equip supportive housing tenants with a Bill of Rights. The city must continue to invest in new supportive housing, but it must also simultaneously implement these safeguards. Thank you for the opportunity to testify and for the council's dedication to helping homeless New Yorkers.
Thank you, Jackie. And I just the collaboration with Legal Aid and Coalition and this committee, I'm sure something that will continue long into the future, but it has been absolutely essential in us doing our work. And I just can't tell you how much I appreciate everything that you and your predecessors, Giselle and Patrick and everybody have been, and I greatly appreciate everything that you guys have done. Thank you. And the same goes for Legal Aid too.
Thank you to this panel for your testimony. We will now go to our next panel, seeing no council members with questions. Our next panel will consist of Tierra Labrada, Eric Rosenbaum, Tawaki Komatsu, Katrina Corbel, and Winston Tokahisa. We will begin with Tierra once the sergeant prompts you.
Starting time.
Oh, hi everybody. Good afternoon, Chair Levin and everyone on the General Welfare Committee. My name is Tierra Labrada, and I am the Senior Policy Analyst at the Supportive Housing Network of New York. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. There are over 18,000 single adults sleeping in DHS shelters each night in September 2021, 97% more than a decade ago, and almost 4,000 unsheltered adults as of the last point in time. Because of centuries of institutional racism and economic injustices, people living without housing are disproportionately Black and Latinx. 86% of single adults in DHS identify as such. Additionally, an estimated 68% have a disability. Multiple studies have documented the impact of homelessness on health and mortality. We have included an appendix listing 346 names of New Yorkers who died in 2020, who were honored at the annual Homeless Persons Memorial Day. COVID has also increased mental health needs related to anxiety, depression, and suicide ideation, as well as alcohol and substance use, and worsened chronic health conditions. However, we do have some solutions. Supportive housing is uniquely positioned to address these crises. While it is not the only solution for single adult homelessness, it is an important piece of the puzzle. I will present a brief overview of our recommendations with added detail in our written testimony. A recent survey conducted by the network suggests that the vacancy rate in existing supportive housing is around 10%. We must reduce as many bureaucratic requirements as possible and invest in our coordinated assessment and placement system. Any hiring freeze still in place over a city agency position related to moving someone from homelessness into housing must be lifted immediately. While highly successful, the New York City 1515 program could benefit from adjustments, including reallocating the 50-50 split between congregate and scattered site to a 75-25 split, increasing scattered site contract rates to align each year with the fair market rent, and increasing service dollars to match those of congregate housing, and prioritizing nonprofit development. We must preserve and create an additional 1,000 units per year. We must preserve existing congregate and scattered site supportive housing, which could be lost due to low contract rates that make programs very hard to operate. New units should also be created for people who are excluded from NYC 1515 eligibility because stays in jails, prisons, and hospitals do not count toward the definition of chronic homelessness. The city needs a broad mandate to allocate suitable land for supportive housing development beyond HPD and DHS sites. Additional ideas to speed and coordinate development approvals and modify zoning can be found in our written testimony. And thank you.
Thank you, Tiara. I just want to acknowledge the great work that Shinny does day in and day out, and your collaboration with us just over the last couple of weeks and months on Intro 2176, which I think you personally probably spent 20 hours plus on, and easily, and then I appreciate everything you did on that and continue to do. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure working with you, council member, and farewell, and we look forward to seeing what you do next.
Me too. Thank you, Tara. Thank you for everything. Thanks.
Thank you for your testimony. We will now turn to Eric Rosenbaum. Eric, you may begin when prompted by the sergeant.
Starting time.
Thanks. I'm Eric Rosenbaum. I'm the CEO of Project Renewal, a New York City Homeless Services nonprofit agency. I'm grateful to Speaker Johnson, Chair Levin, and the entire City Council for your support during our programs. For over a half century, Project Renewals provided shelter, housing, healthcare, and employment services to thousands of New Yorkers experiencing homelessness, with special focus on those who are affected by mental illness, substance use, and criminal justice involvement. I'm going to try not to repeat a lot of what's been said before, but I want to add one point. In the 30 years from 1990 to 2020, New York City added 1.5 million people. That's and at the same time, as you've heard, we've lost 150,000 rent-regulated apartments. So that means that for every 10 new people that New York accommodated, we lost a rent-regulated apartment. And that is the big picture that's driving homelessness. It's a key reason why in the past 10 years, pre-pandemic, the single adult shelter was rising by 1,000 people a year. And 1,000 people a year would mean 5 new 200-bed shelters every year just to keep pace with the growth in need for shelter without doing anything to actually reduce it. And over 10 years, that's 50 200-bed shelters. That's a ginormous number. And if we now intend to close Rikers Island and reduce incarceration, we'll still need even more housing with supportive services. So it's great that we're increasing the value of housing vouchers, but unless we're also increasing the actual supply of housing in which those vouchers can be used, all we're really doing is increasing the amount of subsidy we're paying to landlords without actually reducing homelessness. So as we illustrated in a project renewal policy paper, hotel conversions could provide thousands of safe, affordable, and supportive housing units at a much lower cost than new construction, and really crucially, do it in a fraction of the time. Using the HPD master lease would fund this with almost no increase in capital funding. Simply put, this lease guarantees the rental subsidies from the city vouchers, and that becomes collateral that would allow nonprofits to secure debt financing outside the existing capital appropriation process. But any new capital that the city or state or even the federal government commits for new construction, that's going to take 5 years before a single homeless person's actually living in one of those apartments. So these hotels.
You can keep going, Eric. Go ahead.
Thanks. So these hotel conversions are literally almost the only opportunity that could actually reduce the need for shelter in the 4 years of the next administration. Friday's New York Times article made clear both the scope of this opportunity and the challenges we face in achieving it. Now, doing anything this scale is hard in our city, but the status quo almost certainly means building more and more shelter. It means more and more angry neighborhood residents showing up at town halls and community board meetings, fighting those shelters, and huge DHS budget increases to fund them. So if we've got to fight these kind of battles, I'd rather be fighting for more housing than more shelter. Earlier this year, the city claimed that converting a hotel to residential use requires a different type of certificate of occupancy that doesn't exist in a hotel. But the Times article made clear that view isn't consistent with precedent. And sadly, the very hotels that the city claims can't be made into housing are almost certainly going to become shelter. So I urge the city to reconsider these very narrow legal interpretations. And if they don't, then the council can pass legislation creating a new housing classification in the building code, allowing nonprofits to buy hotels and convert them into supportive and affordable housing. The city could also help by modifying the real estate tax system that privileges single-family homes over affordable apartment buildings, and by legislating zoning requirements in every neighborhood that would increase housing affordability so that NIMBY pressure can't stop it, and minimizing the kind of land speculation that only makes affordability harder to achieve. And finally, and I'm glad someone else mentioned this, bureaucratic challenges, including staffing shortages in city agencies, are making it hard to fill the vacancies in the 1,000 supported housing units that Project Renewal operates. As one example, it takes 3 to 6 months to get the medical examiner's office to clear an apartment in which someone died. Getting approval for a housing package takes months. If we could self-certify clients in our own shelter programs for vacancies in our housing, we could relieve some of the bureaucratic burden and reduce those delays. That wouldn't cost anybody anything. I know none of this is easy, but the alternative, which is more and more shelter and more people on the streets, can't be acceptable. Thank you for this opportunity to testify, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Eric. And I think a lot of this obviously is going to be up to the next administration and council, and it's my hope that that they take advantage of the market for these hotels. You know, now, as the Times article this week, last week mentioned, is you know, there's a level of urgency, and this opportunity will have passed us by if we don't act quickly. So I appreciate the urgency with which you deliver that testimony. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric, for your testimony. We will now hear from Katrina Corbel. Katrina, you may begin when prompted by the sergeant.
Starting time.
Hi, my name is Katrina Corbel. I'm a formerly street homeless and shelter homeless New Yorker, arguably remaining at risk of having to re-enter the shelter system, working with nonprofits to try and prevent that. I am currently a member of the Supportive Housing Organized and United Tenants, Rise and Resist, and Coalition's Client Advisory Group. I arrived in New York City 10 years ago. I was a college graduate student, and I was also an SSI recipient, but both HRA and SSI said that I was not their problem. HRA said that I was a federal recipient, so to go to SSI. SSI said that they didn't do housing, so go to HRA. So I literally was on 700 and change and told to go find an apartment in New York City, literally on $700. And at the time I was told, I think Bloomberg was still mayor, and I was told if I went into the city shelter system, I was going to have to pay 30% of my $700 to live with somewhere between 16 and 60 people, and pay 30% of my $700 to live with those many people. So that's why I chose street homeless. I was with my Occupy Wall Street friends. We were still doing sleepful protests on the streets. Younger people were assessed for street homeless and received vouchers, but adults were like ignored. I worked with different agencies. BRC never recognized me as homeless. I wasn't smelly enough, tall enough, old enough, man enough. So BRC was always just ignoring me. I worked with, I tried working with Sydney, Bailey House, CNCS, Urban Outreach, We Care, FedCap, Project Renewal. I was too positive, too happy. I was told I was supposed to be eligible for supportive housing because of my physical disabilities, but it led nowhere. No one was able to figure out how to get me into supportive housing again in 2013. After a work injury, I was sent back to FedCap, We Care, and it's a long story that I'll have in the written testimony, but I had to go back to basic shelter for general population because by then I had an emotional support animal and she and I could not handle the streets and the subway. Every time she needed to use a sandbox, I would get off the subway, make up her sandbox, and that was just too much stress on me. So we went to Franklin. Franklin Shelter kicked us out immediately.
You could go ahead and finish, Katrina.
Okay. We tried to do the street homeless outreach with Goddard Riverside. Goddard Riverside had to witness us on the street, similar to what Chair Levin had mentioned, where you had to be seen a number of times within a number of weeks. Instead, I was seen by somebody who tried to sexually assault me. I was able to call the police. The police were trying to not report it. Luckily, one police officer was able to help get that reported and documented and get that guy off the streets. I was then able to work with Coalition for the Homeless to get the proper documentation to make the Department of Homeless Services accept me and my emotional support animal to get into the shelter. It then took 14 months or 420 days to get out of the shelter, and that was through the 2010E program. But that was through a number of scattered site housing saying that they did not have to take emotional support animals despite the fair housing law. Some of the supporting housing programs were offering to have me trade in my emotional support animal for a fish. They literally did not want me to come in with a cat or a dog, and they wanted me to just, I don't know where you would trade in another animal for a fish, but I don't know if that sounded as ridiculous to them as it did to the rest of us. And so I just think that there needs to be more of an outreach. One of the ideas I'm trying to suggest to people is to work with other formerly homeless people. There are some programs like Community Access that will work with formerly homeless people or peers that have been through the system and can help suggest things to how to be more successful or how to just relate to the people. One of my housing advisors didn't want to stay in the system. She was intending to be a cook. And so she had no interest in actually staying and working with us. She was just there because she needed a paycheck to not become homeless. And so I just think that there needs to be more like more respect and more consideration shown towards the people that they are working with, instead of just like laughing at us or making fun of us and like not respecting us. A lot of people that are working towards helping the people in the homeless shelters are not respecting the people that they are working for. The people that are in the homeless shelters are providing their paychecks, arguably, and are not being shown any respect at all. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the past few years and for all that you are doing with us. And I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Katrina, and I really appreciate you telling your story and providing your testimony. And I wish you all the success in the future.
Thank you, Katrina, for your testimony. We will now hear from Winston Takahisa. Winston, you may begin when prompted by the sergeant.
Starting time.
When I first exited the shelter system and homelessness just over 2 weeks ago, I was excited, but quickly I found that excitement gave way to anxiety. When I trusted staff at the Department of Homeless Services and the Human Resources Administration, whom I typically refer to as the two-letter agencies, perform their duties to the letter, more should have been done to ease my transition. For example, a couple of days before my move out, furniture money was deposited onto my electronic benefit transfer card. As much as some people like to refer to a benefit card as a poor man's credit card, regrettably, it is not. In order to be able to use the funds, I commuted to Chase Bank to avoid the withdrawal fee. While I was only able to withdraw $500 out of over $1,000, it was charged $7.55 anyway. No matter who you are, moving is messy and inconvenient. So why is it that what should be a help to those in need is made a hindrance by hoops and hurdles? If the entire move-out process takes about a month from start to finish, why not make a portion of the funds available sooner? Better yet, why not disperse the funds in such a way that makes them immediately accessible in their entirety, like an electronic fund transfer or prepaid debit card? For another example, I had the misfortune of my public assistance case closing without my knowledge just a few days before I signed my leave. Fortunately, I reapplied and was awarded emergency food stamps the same day. Unfortunately, I was also expected to make 1 month's ration last for 2 months. A tall order made taller of the harmful food offerings of my shelter. If it was not for food pantries and furniture money, I do not know how I would have made it through November. I remember when my housing specialist, Ms. Epsy, was previously a Core Services Group 1 shelter, mentioned intensely scheduling move-outs to coincide with benefit pickup dates. As someone who has now moved out, I have a newfound appreciation for this wisdom and cannot help but ask why this appears to have occurred to no one else. The only thing better would be to provide upcoming benefits in advance and send to the new date, or better still, just provide an additional pickup as a one-time bonus. Which brings me to my final example. I just received my benefits for the month, and I only received a paltry $22.50, and I honestly have no idea what the two-letter agencies expect me to do with that. One of the first things I did after moving into my apartment was apply for the emergency broadband benefit program with Spectrum. Even after applying for the $50 discount, I'm already on the hook for a Wi-Fi router rental and a requisite landline at a total of about $17 a month. Fortunately, I still have a little bit of furniture money left, but it will only go so far. I remember when I first learned of all the mental gymnastics that goes into not paying for people, which does nothing to resolve poverty. If we can increase food stamps on account of the pandemic, how can we not give cash a chance? With the emergence of COVID-19 has created an unprecedented crisis, it also creates an unparalleled opportunity.
Time expired.
You
To rectify
can go ahead and finish, Winston.
Thank you. To rectify long-term historic injustices. I'm confident that beginning with the end in mind, by increasing access to move-out funds, make sure individuals have ample food stamps, and increased levels of cash assistance available upon move-out are instrumental in ensuring permanency and stability. Thank you.
Thank you, Winston.
Thank you to Winston and this entire panel for your testimony. We've now heard from everyone who has signed up to testify, and we appreciate everyone's time, presence, and testimony. We would like to make sure that we haven't inadvertently missed anyone who wants to testify. So anyone who that applies to, please use the raise hand function in Zoom, and we will call on you in the order of hands raised. Okay, I'm not seeing any additional panelists. So I would like to note again that written testimony will be reviewed in full by committee staff, and that it can be submitted to the record up to 72 hours after the close of this hearing by emailing it to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Chair Levin, we have concluded public testimony for this hearing. So it's back over to you for closing.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Again, I want to thank committee staff, Natalie, Crystal, Aminta, and my staff, and our sergeants at arms for conducting the hearing, as well as all the council staff that get these hearings up and running remotely. And I want to thank everybody that just delivered testimony. It's, as I said before, it's been really an honor of a lifetime to be able to have had this opportunity to chair this committee. I am hopeful and confident that with the level of engagement and advocacy from people with lived experience, people who are currently facing challenges within the DHS system or HRA system or ACS system, and with the wisdom and perspective that they bring to the conversation, as well as providers and people who want to make our city a better place and a fairer place and a more compassionate city. I'm confident that we'll continue to make strides. There's still a lot more to do. I hope that the next council and the next administration take on these challenges with the urgency that they really demand. And with that, thank you all. It's been a wonderful experience, and I'll see you all soon. Thanks. This hearing is adjourned.